We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H, and I mean, not just this week, for the second time this week, I'm back, and I'm here with...
Lee Overstreet, pinch hitting one more time until Tom gets regular again, and by that I mean on the show again, not that kind of regular. And I think he's going to get regular now, right?
That's
and
right.
This is Joe Klusnick. We emptied out the entire bullpen.
That is what we're doing, yeah. Tom has returned. You probably... Folks listening to this podcast heard that episode first. We recorded it first, which means we'll more than likely release that one first. And as you would have heard at the end of that episode, Tom does intend to be back full time now. So that meant we didn't have time to do the topic that we had teased all along with Mr. Lee Overstreet. And we didn't have time to have Joe Klusnick back on as guest co-host one more time before Tom's return. So I said, well, hey, we got to get those things. We said that we would. We've got to keep our word. That's one thing. And then also... Tom and I, we were catching up mostly his first episode back. Here we're easing him back into a little bit. So I didn't try to rush us through 15 to 17 questions this week, which means we have 10 questions still on our topic list here that need to be covered and answered. So,
and I did finally catch up on all of the Tom updates and shows up to now. So I feel good about that. It takes me a while to watch things.
So here we are, special 3-man, 3-headed episode. Heck of a time setting up my OBS things because I don't know what I'm doing in OBS. This is going to not look fantastic, but whatever. Now you got 3 talking heads coming at you, and that's what you're going to be able to enjoy if you're watching the video version. And if you're listening to the audio version, you'll have 3 voices to pay attention to. Luckily, our voices all sound pretty distinct and different, so I think you'll be able to tell Rob and Lee and Joe apart.
Plus, there's more chances to step on each other this way.
Absolutely.
Right.
Such a well-oiled machine around these parts, as you can tell by us starting 25 minutes later than we said we would. But nobody knows that listening just to the recording of it after the fact. So, let's see here. We're going to first start by introducing, in case you have no idea what the heck you're listening to, this is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And if you would like your questions answered, all you have to do is ask them. You ask by emailing them to us at question@avrant.com. That is our email address. It is by far the best way to get in touch with us. We answer first in, first out, and everything that gets sent to us that is, not something that we're going to say, hey, we're not going to answer that person. We don't do much editorializing that way here. Everything that comes in gets answered on the podcast. So question@avrant.com is the way to reach us. You can find us in other ways as well. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/AVRant podcast. And if you would like to see the video that I talked about, see images that we're referencing in real time as they're being referenced, you can come to our YouTube page, youtube.com/AVRant. And that's where you can see the video versions of things. You can come to our website as well. Surprise, surprise, it's avrant.com. We got our show notes there. We got links to the products that we recommend and articles that we reference. Links to our Flickr album where you can see those images in still image form as well. And you can reach all of us individually if you'd like to. I can be reached via email at rob@avrant.com. Lee can be reached at email via lee@avrant.com.
That's right. It took 10 years, Joe. Don't look like that. It took 10 years to get that email address.
There is a tom@avrant.com email address to reach out to Tom Andrew directly, but there is no joe@avrant.com email address.
One day, man.
Gotta pay the dues. Even though you got the 3-letter first name, we just couldn't make it happen. Too many characters to deal with. But there are other ways to reach out to Joe. How can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
You can look for me on most of the forums. JSKMDWK is the username.
All right. So, anything for us to catch up on before we dig into this here bonus episode podcast for this week?
Yeah, I just went out and ate the biggest Reuben sandwich you've ever seen, and I followed it up with an ice cream cone. So there's a non-zero chance I just collapse and start snoring before this is over.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I had chicken soup.
Wow, there you go.
That sounds better than what I did.
I guess I'm the weather update because we have a, what the heck did they refer to it here off the West Coast? I think it was like a A bomb cyclone is the term that
Bomb
they used or
cyclone.
something like that. It's
So it's
windy.
cold there.
It's legitimately
Windy.
windy outside, and we got a snowfall, first snowfall of the year. So that has taken place. Everything's pretty all right. So there we go.
Oh no, that sounds terrible to me, man. That snow sounds terrible. It's 20 degrees C right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's very mild weather where you are. But yes, the biggest news, of course, the biggest thing to catch up on, if somehow you're listening to this episode before the episode that came out prior to this episode this week, the biggest news is Tom Andry, the actual host and founder of this podcast, is back and should be back going forward. So he's in a lovely echoey apartment room right now, but on a new microphone, a dynamic microphone, very, very similar to the one I'm using. So we don't hear too much of that echo in the background, but we do get to notice just how much Tom moves around in that seat of his, because he's used to a compression microphone, condenser microphone, where he can move around and the volume of his voice doesn't change too much. And now you get to hear exactly how important it is to talk down the barrel of a dynamic microphone. So that's going to be a fun experience from here on out. But yes, without any further ado, we do have our regular segments of this here podcast. It's not going to be a gigantic change in format other than there being three of us here all at once. So we're going to talk about what we watched. I already discussed what I watched this week with Tom, so you won't hear a duplicate of that from me, but we have some updates. Who wants to go first? Lee, Joe, who's going first?
I want to hear what Lee thought of Oppenheimer.
Okay.
What I thought. Sorry. Okay. So listen, I finished Oppenheimer. It only took me 3 viewing sessions to get through.
3 viewing sessions. It wasn't half and half.
That's where my ADHD is at this point. And I'm a little hypocritical about acting like I can't pay attention to something.
Okay.
I did watch like a 3.5-hour video about electric cars racing across the country.
Sure.
So, but I watched it in like 4 segments.
I was going to say, not all in one go, right? So
no, I can't think of what I spent 3.5 hours doing other than sleeping.
okay.
I'm too twitchy and too many things in my brain to possibly do that. So, but I did watch the rest of Oppenheimer, and I liked the movie overall. I don't know that I have a lot more to add compared to the last time we talked about it, where I complained a little bit about the rumbly bumbly bass seemed almost pointless. It was like if you're trying to set a mood, does it have to be rumbly bumbly constantly? That seemed a bit much. It's a very dark movie, both in theme and in actual light output.
Okay.
And then also I recently, after that, there's another thing I watched. It's about a 30-minute documentary about the real Oppenheimer. And, the movie wasn't way off. It took liberties.
Sure.
But I think the real life Oppenheimer I appreciated a little more than the movie Oppenheimer, the human being. So I'm still, there was just, I don't know, a lot in there was kind of cringe, and they were trying too hard to work in certain things. I don't know. It was okay. It was good. I think I enjoyed Barbie more from that same time period. I can't imagine the people that went and saw Barbie and Oppenheimer in the same day.
Oh, yes.
That's 2 different vibes.
That was the point. That was the juxtaposition and the anachronism and what made it so enjoyable to put those 2 movies together as though there's some kind of double header. Yeah,
because Oppenheimer is bleak.
Do you feel like it deserved its best picture?
No.
Okay,
it's not that good. It's good. It's good. But it's not like revolutionary best picture good.
If you did do the Barbenheimer double feature, what order would you watch them in? Barbie first, Oppenheimer second, or Oppenheimer first, Barbie second?
Oppenheimer first.
Okay.
Yeah. Barbie brings you back up.
Yeah. Like I've watched some pretty bleak stuff. I'm kind of weird. I don't mind like something that has no happy ending or wrap up. It just everybody dies. I watch stuff like that every now and then. But if you're doing this in the theater and you got to walk out of the theater and you're watching 2, that means you got to watch 1 during the day.
Yep.
I wouldn't watch Oppenheimer late at night and walk out of the theater and drive home. After that, we're all going to murder each other.
Hopefully
great. No, do that in the afternoon.
Okay.
And Barbie in the evening if you were going to do it. So I didn't do it back then because I'm still not going to theaters very much. I can't even remember my last actual theater visit. Must not have been anything that stood out too much because it's so good at home.
It is.
And it's like 10 family visits to the theater and you can buy a TV. You can buy an OLED and surround sound. It's just so expensive. And also I live in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and our theater is terrible.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I mean,
that
it's
makes
just
a difference,
so
all right.
average. Anytime I do get to see a movie in a big city, I sound so country. Like when I get to go to the big city, I go to a real theater. and it's so much better.
They make you put your shoes on in those, you know.
Yeah. Can't just wear your overalls and no shirt. So.
Alrighty, well, with that, what has Joe been watching? We haven't talked to Joe in a little while here, so we are playing some catch up.
Yeah, so on the topic of best pictures, coming out of October, we watched a whole bunch of scary movies. We're trying to get a little more quality. So my wife and I have a running list of all of the best picture movies, and we kind of go down and pick off which ones we want to watch. So over the last week, we hit 3 of them. Starting from least to most favorite, we watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Very strong performances in that, but also kind of a downer movie. Not everyone survives that one. But it was interesting. We watched it streaming. A lot of film grain. A lot of, I don't want to say artifacts, but definitely film elements that you saw in it. In the an all black screen, you'd see white chunky pieces. Yeah. Even when we were streaming it, but it looked very good for a movie from the 70s. Next one we watched was Amadeus. Yes. We watched the director's cut of this, and that was a 3-hour slog also. I think I stayed awake for most of it, but
that's one where I think maybe the theatrical version is the superior version on that one.
Probably. I was very impressed by F. Murray Abraham's acting in that. He really did a good job of portraying someone who was both admiring and in love with someone and hating and jealous of them and destroying them through it. So I thought that was impressive. I didn't really care for the guy who played Amadeus himself, Mozart. But I thought he did a good job, but it was just annoying. And these are movies from years ago.
Historically completely inaccurate. It has nothing to do with actual history, that movie. But it's such a blast just to watch that movie. It's so compelling, the storytelling and the performances. Yeah.
And that was, I think, in the 80s also. That was when we watched off Kaleidescape. Very front heavy on most of the soundstage. Yeah. Not a ton of surround to that one. And then the third one that we watched, and we're getting ready to go to the theaters, is Gladiator.
Okay.
Which is just a favorite film of mine. I remember seeing that in the theater. I've seen it many times since. Some amazing imagery, some of the best, lines and dialogue, very quotable. Really a masterful, historic, epic piece of film. And we have tickets to go see Gladiator 2 next week.
Okay. Every time I've watched Gladiator, which I think I've only seen it 3 times at this point, but each time I've seen it, it's better than I remember it having been. I'm like, that is a better movie than I remembered it as being a good movie. I'm like, no, it's even better than I remember it. So that's one that's worth
never saw
revisiting.
Gladiator, but I remember as a teenager I went to see Amadeus. Yeah. Just because I liked the Falco song.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in it, by the way.
I know, but I think I recall just thinking, man, this is weird. But teenager, what are you gonna do, right? It really wasn't a movie for.
Well, if you haven't seen Gladiator, that's really a good one to see.
That is absolutely worth watching, and in a home theater setting for sure. Play that nice and loud and get the lights off, and that is one to immerse yourself and enjoy for sure. So just before we move on with the podcast, I'm going to give a little behind the scenes programming note, because Joe, I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening, but when you're beginning speaking after you've been silent for a while, we are getting some clipping on your mic again. So I don't know what's going on with those levels, but you can have a peek at that while I go through the next section, which is to thank our listeners of the week. Listeners of the week are people who have supported this podcast in some way, and our list here is not very filled in because Tom and I recorded earlier and we listed through all the names and all the people who have supported the podcast this week, so we'll have a whole new crop of names to mention next week. But we can say in this section that once again, if you want to support the podcast itself financially, all of the behind the scenes costs of keeping this thing going, the best way to do that is through Patreon. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So we have 132 patrons who've been holding strong there for several weeks now, and that's very, very nice. We thank you so much for this financial support. It is what allows the podcast to keep going without Tom having to pay out of pocket, because he can't pay for stuff out of pocket right now.
No.
And on that tip, we do have a PayPal donation link as well. If you come to our website, avrant.com, over on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of a cup of coffee and the word support AVRant. And if you click on any of that, it will take you to PayPal, where you can make a one-time donation that way. Or in fact, you can sign up to make a recurring donation through PayPal if you'd like to. You don't have to have a PayPal account. You can just sign up with your credit card information if you don't want to create yet another account on the internet. But at the moment, all of the PayPal donations, they are going straight to Tom and his family. He is receiving all of those as donations for what he's gone through, a house completely destroyed by the 2 hurricanes back to back. Thankfully, it seems like Tropical Storm Sarah is not going to be an issue for where he's living there. But that would have been the triple whammy. But he did suffer 3 events because the Milton didn't just re-damage his house with a tree falling into the roof. It also flooded the storage facility where the things they had attempted to save during Hurricane Helene ended up getting flooded in their storage location during Hurricane Milton. So it has been a terrible time all around, but as you know, things are gradually, little by little, getting better for Tom, and we're very happy about that. So he's in a lease for the next few months. At least he knows where he's going to live, and those PayPal donations have honestly been a bright spot and a little bit of relief for him. So a few little items that they've needed to purchase right this second, they've been able to do so because of those PayPal donations. So we cannot thank our supporters enough. It is absolutely tremendous that people have come through that way. So thank you so much to our listeners of the week, and thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. So with that, we can get on to the news. How about Lee? Why don't you take us through our first news story? Because we actually, even though Tom and I covered a news story earlier on, this broke just today, and we're recording this in the evening, so we can talk about a new news story right now.
Let's do it. Let's do some news. Bose has purchased McIntosh Group. Boy, oh boy. Which includes the brands McIntosh and Sonus Faber.
That's how I've always said it. Some people say Faber. I'm not actually sure what's correct.
Looks like a Faber. Sonus Faber. Bose says the purchase will allow them to infuse their technology based on audio research into new categories of luxury products. As McIntosh continues to focus on speakers, amplifiers, and turntables, and they are especially focused on the automotive sector, where McIntosh has already had a limited agreement with Jeep, and Bose has worked with GM, Honda, and Nissan. And I'm the wrong person to read that story because Bose.
I know.
Look, I'm wearing my Bose Overlords shirt today.
He is indeed. Look at that. Joe, you had some thoughts on this. So, what's going on with this purchase here?
So I've never been impressed by Bose. I'm surprised that they made this move. If you can't put your specs on a product, really, what good are you?
Thank you.
It's very interesting to see. I think that maybe it will infuse cash into these brands and they'll be able to keep coming out. But, Bose has gone through a lot of struggles lately, closing a lot of their retail stores, things like that. So I'm curious to see what happens there.
Yeah, I saw some commentary online where, clearly these are 2 audio companies. So at least this is a consolidation that, on the face of it, is fairly easy to understand. These aren't completely disparate, company groups like we saw when, Massimo purchased Sound United. It's like, well, what's a medical company purchasing an audio brand? I mean, these are 2 audio brands getting together. But I saw a little bit of commentary being like, what's the actual crossover between Bose and McIntosh? I'm like, well, that's easy. Gigantic markups. That's the crossover.
Yeah,
that's what they have in
that
common.
And just brand name recognition as being something that's supposed to be good. And
Right.
both of those companies are riding the longest coattails in the history of the world. They were both really good in the 70s, maybe into the 80s.
I would rather Bose buys Macintosh than some venture capitalist who, owns a million other brands that are going to strip them apart.
Well,
so
the thing
you're right. At least it's in the audio industry.
McIntosh Group was owned prior to Bose making this purchase by a private equity firm that's who used to own McIntosh Group. So they survived through that and have now been purchased by at least a company that is dedicated to audio. We can say that much about Bose for sure. They are dedicated to the audio scene. So yeah.
Neither one of these companies are innovators in any way. They are marketers.
I wouldn't say that.
Not now, not today.
Oh, okay.
They were.
Yeah.
That's why I said coattails, man. They were fantastic. They were amazing. I can still remember talking about being like a teenager, going to the mall, and these department stores would have big fancy rooms for the more expensive electronics, and I'd go in and touch things and get kicked out eventually because I turned stuff up too loud. And I remember a gigantic block Macintosh with the cool analog VU meters with the blue background, and like, whoa, this must be really good. It's 200 watts instead of 100, And back then it probably was very, very good. But now, no, those are just those are names now that you slap on things like Beats by Dre or something.
Which is owned by Apple now. There was another consolidation, so wonderful there. But very little fear that Bose is going to come in and completely slash and cut everything in McIntosh, because by all accounts in the news release that they give, they're pretty much going to be continuing to run these as separate companies, but they're looking to allow the Bose name to get more into the outright luxury end of the market, and then looking to bring the McIntosh name more into the automotive side for sure. That was a really, really big focus. That was very clear from their PR news releases, that they're very much looking at that automotive sector to make the gains and make this purchase worthwhile. So there we go, audio merger.
I forget which manufacturer it was, which car manufacturer it was, had McIntosh simulated analog VU meters on a screen. Was that Jeep? I can't remember.
Yeah.
That's Jeep.
Was it Jeep? Yeah, and my eyes rolled so hard, my contact lens popped out.
I remember installing McIntosh car audio amplifiers back in the day with the blue dials. Yeah.
Yeah. They're
so
pretty.
With that news story done, Joe had another story here that he seemed to want to cover. I'm not really sure this is news, but Joe, why don't you take us through this?
This is exciting news. Fast Company's 2024 next big thing in tech list has been announced, and Kaleidescape received the Enduring Impact 15 plus years in business award. This new category focuses on the tech breakthroughs from organizations that have been in business for over 15 years. There's a great press release about it.
And you got to come to YouTube because we got another logo on Joe's chest there. You wouldn't be able to see that in audio only form. Yes. All right.
These are all the stories we have.
So I don't know about Fast Company and their annual list of next big things, but is this like most consumer electronics awards where you just purchase the award?
Well, I think the thing that I found interest in is that they've been around 15 years. People are constantly...
Well, Kaleidescape has, yeah.
Yeah, correct. I don't know how long Fast Company's been around, but...
Yeah, well, at least 4 years, right? This is the fourth annual list, so at least 4.
That's right.
But, it does show a lot of longevity for a company that was a groundbreaker, someone very innovative, and has continued to be in business and providing, I think, better and better iterations of their product at a more value-focused price point for Kaleidescape. I've been a big fan of their product for years and years. Have it in a rack of equipment right over there and enjoy watching most of our movies that we watch in the home theater on it.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much set my mind that I will be getting myself a Strato V at some point now. So,
nice.
Yeah, it's just I do want that consistency, right? The even with the disc releases, it's like not always the most consistent anymore. It's getting pretty tough for companies to justify spending all the time and money and effort on their disc releases anymore. So once Kaleidescape is still doing that, because they're getting those mezzanine files directly from the studios, and like, well, if no one else is going to make a consistently good transfer and compression pass, then they'll do it themselves. So I like that, and that's, as far as purchasing movies, probably the way I'm going to be going moving forward. But yeah, that was all the new news that just happened in the interim between Tom and me recording, and now Lee and Joe and me recording. So that means we've got a couple of comments that we can cover here. And Lee, you've got to start us off with our first comment for this episode.
I didn't know this would be a comment on the show, but I sent Rob an image that I created a few years ago when I refound some movie ticket stubs from the 1980s. So I'm old. I was a teenager in the 80s, and for some reason, I didn't remember doing this until I found them recently. I would keep every ticket stub, and in tiny little letters, I'd write the name of the movie on there. And I don't know if you're able on the YouTube video version of the podcast here to kind of scroll through.
No, this is all just going to be one
720p
image, so it's going to be kind of tough to make out. It's only a 1080p image I'm uploading to Flickr, so that's not going to be all that much more clear, but you can blow that one up a little bit more. Zoom in on it if you please.
A few things to notice is you're probably looking at prices of $3 and $4 to go see a movie, and I can't remember. There's one that says like $2.50, and you've got things on there. I'm seeing Rambo and Throw Mama from the Train, and The Color Purple, and The Fly is on there. That was a good one. There's some on there I can't even see it now. I'd have to look at my own version of this, but there was a couple of movies I didn't even remember.
Yep, fair enough.
I can't. I wish I could read them all, but there's Big. That's a really good one. Yeah. So I'm toying with the idea of turning this into a list and rewatching them.
Right.
It's just Lee's teenage mid-'80s going to the movies list. And just see what I think of it all, because I know there's going to be there's some good ones on there, and there's going to be some ridiculous ones. I see Twins.
Yes, sure. Nothing ridiculous about that. That was an entertaining movie.
I
and
guess
for the
so.
audio-only podcast, these look like the Chuck E. Cheese color-coded tickets, right? These aren't the big ones that you get as a receipt today.
No, there's no barcode on these. There's no scannable QR code.
Right.
These are just look like I just won something playing something at the carnival. I'm going to go get, playing skee ball. Yeah, and I'm going to go get like a stuffed animal. That old school tickets.
And that was clearly a real life human who ripped that ticket in half. That's how that worked.
Exactly. You handed it to a person, they tore it and handed it back to
That's
you.
right.
Them good old days, man. So I hope everybody has fun with that, and maybe we can make a list or something and just kind of tap. So that might be a fun project for me to get back into watching some movies.
With Lee there. Yeah,
I think I already own all of those movies.
Probably. You own just about all the movies. There,
absolutely.
There's I think there's like a vampire Hitcher. What is Hitcher?
Oh, that was
I don't even remember.
Thriller. That was. I remember that movie very well. That's the one where they tear the girl in half. The guy on the psychotic hitchhiker gets in the car. C. Thomas Howell was the driver, and the hitcher was played by the guy who played Warwick Batty in. Okay, it'll come back to me. Sorry.
Yep, I'm drawing a blank on that one. But
I do not remember that movie at all. So I was a weird teenager, man. I also see Gung Ho.
Sure.
I think I remember that one. It's Japanese car manufacturer or something.
Is a frog's ass wide or tight?
I can't remember. I don't remember lines from it now. Don't test me that much. But anyway,
in case you
weird
can't tell.
Flashback.
Yes,
weird
Lee likes
flashback.
the trip down memory lane. But yeah, I'll move on here to our other comment for this episode from Nathan. He wanted to say that he can commiserate with my story from last week about setting up an Insignia TV, a small 124-incher for my aunt that required jumping through a lot more hoops than I was expecting, to be honest. But when Nathan did it, he was setting up a Vizio TV for himself, and he also only wanted to ever use a single source, an Apple TV in his case, and his solution was to enable HDMI-CEC. And only ever use the Apple TV remote and put the Vizio television's remote away. So that actually worked as intended. It powers on the Vizio TV along with the Apple TV source device and automatically selects the correct HDMI input every time, automatically bypassing the Vizio's home screen and advertising that it always wanted to show first, otherwise without CEC active. So he's like, maybe HDMI-CEC would work for my aunt's setup. No, I did think of that. I did try it. That was my intention. But unfortunately, when I went into her, she's using TELUS. That's the telecommunications company for internet and phone and television service that my aunt is going with. Went into the TELUS cable box there. There is a settings menu for HDMI-CEC, and as soon as you click on it, it says an error message. This feature has been disabled. And there's no turning it back on. So that wasn't a solution in this case. I tried it.
That was the wildest story.
Yeah.
All you had to go through. And that poor woman trying to just watch some cable TV.
That's right. And getting a wonderful alert from Alexa when an email came in from Amazon. That's exactly what you want from your new television.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
And for those of you screaming at your podcast right now, Rutger Hauer, who played the Hitcher, Jennifer Jason Leigh was their girlfriend.
Gotcha.
There we go.
So,
I'm never going to remember.
We have teased this for weeks on end at this point, and it is finally time. We're gonna do it here. Before we even answer any listener questions for this episode, we are now gonna discuss Lee's future plans for new front three speakers, left, center, right, up front. Primarily the center is the thing that has the most restrictions on it, so we are going to kind of focus on that a little bit. But
let me give you the story and parameters
set the scene here, Lee. Yeah, for sure.
So in the year of our Lord 2000, I purchased with student loan money, probably, or I don't know how I even had the money for it. I purchased new speakers for a surround sound system. I think I got the receiver in 99 and got these speakers like within a month afterwards, early 2000. And so I ordered big Yamaha tower speakers that said they had a 15-inch woofer on the side. And I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Because all I had to go on, you don't have a lot of things to go listen to in my little town here.
Okay.
At the time, there was a mom and pop shop called Kincaid TV, and they had a little home theater section. You could maybe go, I think at the time, to Rex. There was a store called Rex, R-E-X, and they had a room with carpet, and you could go listen to stuff. But it was hard to judge and compare. And so I went on just knowledge of brand name all the way back into high school from where we had a Yamaha PA system. And I loved how it sounded when I played. We had a Yamaha turntable, Yamaha cassette deck, big old Yamaha amplifier mixer and speakers, and they sounded great to me at the time. So I'm like, give me some big Yamaha speakers. And I got lucky. Well, I got unlucky when they first got delivered coming from UPS. The UPS guy was all mad and huffing and puffing and bringing them to the door because they weigh like 100 pounds together. And they were broken on one corner and I had to refuse that. And he's like lugging it back to the truck. And then I bought them at the local Kincaid TV place. And so they're very good speakers.
Okay.
They're not bad. I spent about $750 in the year 2000. So what's that? A couple $1,000s now, something like that. Got to be 1,800.
Probably not quite that much, but yeah. At least double. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be pushing 1,500, something like that. Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons why I say my budget now is I need for these three speakers to stay under about 2,000. Okay. Because I'm still at the same purchase power kind of comfort level. I can't justify going much higher than that, or I'm going to get mean looks from my wife because we also kind of need a new heat pump. So I want three new speakers, and the reason is, and this isn't going to happen real soon, but the reason is they're very good, they're powerful, but they're not super accurate. You can imagine $750 in the year 2000 buying Yamaha speakers. It was one of their higher end speakers, but not great. And I can tell you from the room correction graph that these speakers roll off fairly gently, but significantly. Anything above about 10 kilohertz, it starts rolling down to 16K. And so there's a gentle, there's about a 3 or 4 decibel boost on the 16K. If you could just picture a smooth gradient up to that is what the room correction came up with. And then they're just not super duper accurate. Okay. And I don't know what happens with these big woofers pointing off to the side. I don't know if that's creating any interesting standing wave thing happening.
Oh, it's gonna do something. It's all gonna depend on your room and dimensions and openings in your seat relative to those locations and that. It is definitely gonna have room interactions. There's no avoiding that. Yeah.
Now, again, I've gotten lucky, so if anyone's like a super dedicated listener, they may remember when I set up the SVS SB2000 Pro subwoofers, talking about the room correction. Then I got very lucky that something about the size of my room, where I put those subs, how the speakers are oriented, they're slightly towed in. These are tower speakers with side-firing big not subwoofers, just woofers on the side, but they're huge. So, I got lucky, and I'm not getting a lot of crazy corrections. Yep. But there's just a fuzziness to these things, and I don't know if it's the age, but it's probably just what they have always been. And coming from a cheap rack stereo system from the 80s, before that, it was a revelation. And so I'm hoping for a little revelation now. So I want that clarity of especially vocals. Yeah. Maybe that gets me into ribbon tweeter territory. I don't know.
Not necessarily, but it could. Yeah.
I like a good crispy sound to it. I want a little more lightness to that treble. And I've heard better, and I know better exists. So. The limitations. I've already said the budget.
Because this is kind of key. So, this is kind of key here.
This is what's key, because I would really, really, really rather not change the entertainment stand that I built. With the help of my father-in-law, I designed it. I drew all the pictures. I picked my sizes and adjustable shelves even. And let me tell you, you want to feel good about yourself, pre-drill the holes for all the adjustable shelves, then assemble it, then put the shelf in, and it fits perfectly. And it doesn't wobble. And then you just take a lap around the room with your arms in the air like, yes! So I'm very proud of this thing, and I think it looks kind of good. It's black. It's pretty simple. Got a very simple trim around it. So I don't want to change it.
Okay.
Now, the problem is I kind of custom built the center channel shelf for my center channel speaker that I bought in the year 2000. And at the time, I remember thinking, I'm being ridiculous. No one's ever going to need to have bigger center channel speaker than this because, you can barely fit it on top of this 31-inch tube television. And so why am I ever going to... Center channel speakers aren't going to get bigger. I'll go ahead and just fit this right here. And also, I wanted to put my receiver underneath the center channel because it's a big fat object, and just visually it looked nice to have TV, center channel, and receiver below. And also, when this entertainment stand was designed and built in the mid-2000s, I thought, no way am I getting a physically bigger receiver than this thing, because that would be ridiculous. Well... Yeah. Now my receiver is down and to the right on one of those adjustable shelves. I had to put it on one of those because it's too tall. And so we have center channel speaker size limitation. And I'm seeing in our little notes here that I sent Rob the measurements of this opening. Yeah. And it's 20 inches wide. 6.5 inches high. Little piece of trim hangs down by 1/8 of an inch, but you can fit a 6.5-inch speaker behind the trim. And it's 7 inches deep.
Right. So, that's pretty small.
The reason it's 7 inches deep, and I could probably put a little extender somehow on there if I had to. If I could probably rig something up to hold a deeper speaker if I had to. It's 7 inches deep because, again, surely no crazy person would ever buy a bigger center channel speaker. But number two, I had the receiver underneath it, and the vents on the receiver were in the back. And I thought, it'd be nice. There's no reason for a full shelf here. I'm only putting this speaker. And so I left it open in the back for the heat to come out.
Which is no longer a consideration now that your receiver is occupying a different shelf location.
Correct. So we can do different things, but I want to keep this entertainment stand. It's slick. And what I don't want... I couldn't put a big center speaker in front of the TV because then the TV would have to go up. And I don't want the TV up, and I don't want to have to go through the trouble of putting it on the wall. So we're just opening Pandora's box here. So
there might be a few additional thoughts about that, but if you're thinking of it and being like, why isn't this the first thing they're tackling? Rest assured, we're gonna get to the notion of completely changing locations or TV height adjustment, that type of thing. We are going to discuss that towards the end of things here.
Just telling you the thoughts I had leading up to this.
Absolutely. But
I begin to look at speakers, just beginning.
In terms of what Lee is looking for, this would be a center speaker that is going inside of a cubby area. We can definitely have it where the physical front of the speaker is essentially flush to the front of the cabinet. But if you're considering something with rear firing ports, that's going to be a little bit of consideration there. There's room inside the cabinet that you could put some insulation behind the speaker to catch a back wave from a rear firing port, but that's another little consideration that we might have in our minds here. So I've been thinking about this for a while. I've put together a whole list of candidates that we can go through here. Joe is able to see that list that I'm talking about, so I just want to get Joe's thoughts first. We're going to go through all these options that I've listed here, but is there anything that jumps out at you, Joe, as something that I've left off the list, or a thought of your own that immediately came to mind that we're not going to be discussing, that we already
have? So I wasn't aware of some of the constraints, but I had thought about, the SVS Ultra stuff. You can really get great deals out there if you're picking it up used right now. If it's physically too large, it may not work.
Even the Prime, right? Even going with their smallest center speaker, the Prime, they've got that tweeter above a mid-range design, and it's simply too tall for the cubby that Lee wants to put it in.
Now, theoretically, I could put it on the bottom shelf, but that feels too far down below the TV.
Any chance you'd go above the TV with it?
It would be so ugly.
I'm trying to work with your constraints.
That was the challenge that Lee laid out before me as well.
But you know what? I'm sure there are plenty of people listening who understand that, life has these limitations, and it just would look so odd with a speaker just right there on the wall.
And that was really why I did want to cover this, because, yes, we're talking about Lee's specific situation, but what you're talking about, wanting essentially a compact center speaker, but that doesn't have really any compromises in sound quality, that's going to be applicable to a lot more people. So that's why I did want to cover this.
So one other one, and I'll share just a little bit of a story about going through something similar, but what about any of the KEF speakers? I don't know if they're physically too tall. if that we run into that issue.
We
there.
did run into that too. Yeah, the Q series, even their smallest, even taking one of like a Q150 bookshelf speaker and turning it on its side, they're kind of chunky little guys, Yeah. So
it's really interesting, people just aren't putting together this kind of entertainment stand, this sort of low slung, wide entertainment stand. And hopefully we can post some pictures somewhere so people can see what I'm talking about.
I'll try to insert those there. So like something like a LS50 on its side that could
I know what those are.
just squeak in there. A KEF LS50 speaker could, but then the budget, getting 3 of those across the front, that starts getting over the budget there. So
and also just to let you know that center speaker, I think we're probably maybe it's like 8.5, 9 feet from it to my head. And it needs to disperse to the entirety of the couch at least, if not a little bit wider. So I want to make sure it's not too narrow. And when I think of those LS50s, aren't they a little more?
The LS50s, that's a concentric design. So they've got nice wide dispersion in all directions, 360-degree dispersion. Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
And Lee, I can appreciate we did custom build a cabinet in one of our previous houses in a niche with our 36-inch tube TV and a big space for a Martin Logan center channel above it, but I knew that when we were building it, the center channel we were going to use. So I understand the constraints.
Well, this entertainment stand was built with a Panasonic 50-inch plasma. So I was already into, I knew this was forever widescreen flat panel TV territory. So although you could probably hold, I don't know how many hundreds of pounds this thing could hold, it's overbuilt for sure. We could all get on it and jump up and down. It'd be fine.
So with that, I'm going to start off the suggestion right away with first thing that came to my mind once I knew we had these pretty strict physical restrictions if this center speaker is going to live inside of the cubby that you've created inside of that stand. So Ascend Acoustics, which was my very first thought, that we'll get to the other true first thought that I had towards the end of this whole segment here. But what would physically fit would be their Sierra Duo V2 at this moment. They started off with the Sierra Luna in this series using the smaller Rowell Ribbon tweeter, and then 4.5-inch woofer is in the Luna. The Duo takes 2 of those 4.5-inch woofers and puts it in a cabinet that is 16.25 inches wide, so that'll fit within the 20-inch width, 5.75 inches high, so even with that 1/8 of an inch trim hanging down, no problem as far as the height, and only 6 inches deep. So physically, this will definitely fit into that cubby. There's no problem with that. Also, this is dual front slot ported, so no problem with backwave coming out of a rear firing port. The ports are firing out the front. So physically, this really does check all the boxes. Honestly, the main drawback to this option is the price. They're $850 each.
Yeah.
And these are an LCR design. That tweeter can be ordered or easily unscrewed and rotated 90 degrees so that the tweeter is always vertical. The tweeter does need to be vertical for a Rowell Ribbon tweeter. It has very limited vertical dispersion, but very wide horizontal dispersion.
See, I have no experience with any sort of ribbon tweeter, and this is where I'm just going to need... Next time I'm in one of them big old cities, I'm going to have to go to someplace and listen. I need to know, is this something I can tell a difference in, and do I like it? I feel like I probably will. But
I mean, these have been Klippel designed and Klippel measured by Dave Fabricant over at Ascend. They have that really ruler flat response, and people might go, oh my goodness, an MTM design, a woofer tweeter woofer design, but rest assured, he has carefully designed the crossover to make sure that you aren't going to have major comb filtering or lobing type of issues. But we do know that Lee likes to sit up in his chair and lie down on his couch, and that limited vertical dispersion, it's possible that could be audible in your setup, or that you might need to put a little bit of a tilt on this so that when you are sitting up properly, that tweeter is aiming at your face, that it isn't
angle it up just
going into your knees type of thing. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if I mentioned my preference would be that small center and some towers, because I have this mental block that if my speaker is too little, it doesn't sound good. I know I'm full of it. I know that's not true.
And you've got your pair of SVS subs to handle the actual bass frequencies. So that,
I'm good on the actual
necessity. Yeah.
But I just feel like because the room was originally set up and to look nice with the two tower speakers. If you took all that volume away and I just had little bookshelves on stands, it would look quite empty, and it throws it off. It's kind of like how I'm stuck with the kind of specific GE Reveal light bulbs in that room.
Okay.
Because that's what I use to pick the colors, like the paint color. And if you change it, everything looks like sickly weird. So it's kind of stuck with the tower, but I like the towers on the sides.
And I mean, the thing is, with any of these physically smaller center speakers that we're going to necessarily be considering in here, you know, like I want to get as close to, if not 3 identical speakers across the front, something that is, you know, really nicely matched your 3 speakers across the front. And very often the tower speakers, I mean, it's not that you can't use them with the physically smaller center. It's just that you're never going to be utilizing the greater headroom that the towers are offering, because the center is going to be the limiting factor. And if anything, people, if they're going to goose one speaker across the front, they're typically making the center speaker louder than the front left and right to try and boost that dialogue intelligibility. So, you know, in this case, I mean, Ascend does have Sierra towers, but that would completely blow your budget out of the water. There's no way that you could go with the tower option. If you got 3 of the Sierra Duo V2s, you know, one horizontal center and a vertical pair LCR, that's going to be $2,500. So we've gone over that $2,000 price point. It's not completely outlandish, but the other option would be to get the Sierra Duo V2 center and then the Luna bookshelf speakers, the Luna V2 bookshelf speakers as the left and right. Now, those are going to be much smaller. They're almost satellite speakers. They're wall mountable. It's a 4.5-inch woofer, just one of them. But that would bring the price for those 3 speakers down to $2,070. You know, so that's definitely within striking distance at that point of the price point. So, I mean, that was just my first thought, because yes, I am an Ascend fan. You talked about, you know, what you really want is a noticeable upgrade in clarity and speech intelligibility, and that Raoul Ribbon tweeter is going to work a treat on that. So that was sort of why that was the first thought. Also, they're gorgeous. Like, the finish wise, there's nothing else on this list that matches their aesthetic beauty. So that's, you know, some of the price you could justify just in terms of that as well.
I mean, I might be able to push the budget, but I'm shooting for the 2,000.
Well, yeah, like $70 more you could probably muster, right? But,
of course, 2070, whatever. Yeah. But what I mean is, like, if I go listen to some of these speakers, if I listen to these Ascends and like all of a sudden I fall in love with that ribbon tweeter, and I can go, okay, I really hear a difference, then I might push the budget more. So the 2,000 or under is a target. Yeah. If I'm blown away by something,
so away.
2 questions.
Okay,
real quick.
Go ahead, Joe.
One, are you driving this with a receiver, or how much power are you putting to the speakers?
Yeah, this is a Yamaha receiver. I can't remember the name of, but it's I think it's just over 100 watts per channel.
But fairly current.
Yeah. 2017, 2018.
Yeah, I think yours was one of the 2000 series, right? So it's one step down from the flagship, I think was what you're going with there. Yeah.
I can't remember.
I know. Does Ascend actually have stores you can listen to it? It's an internet direct company,
they are
right?
internet
so
direct.
You have to get them shipped in.
Yeah, so if you were doing an in-home audition, you would be eating the cost of shipping if you do end up setting them back. But there are, like, visiting Ascend's forum would be the best way, because there are lots of Ascend owners all over the country. Somebody's going to be within driving distance, and they're very much a community that likes to show off their speakers, so that could be an option.
That might be a fun segment on the show in the future if I find somebody that wants to let me listen.
So right away, some people might be thinking, hey, haven't mentioned RBH yet. We will later on, but the reason we're not doing it now is because with their Impression Series speakers, it won't physically fit. So there you go. That's going to be what eliminates a lot of things as far as how we're doing this in order. So the next ones I'm going to mention will easily fit within the budget. This is the least expensive option by a country mile, but they're worth mentioning because RSL has an option that'll physically fit their CG23M speakers. Another MTM design, another basically 4.5-inch woofers on either side of a tweeter, another front slot ported design. So physically, they are quite similar to those Ascend Sierra Duo V2 speakers, but with much, much less expensive components and just a plain matte black finish on the cabinet. No fancy looks here, but these are $150 each. So, 3 of them is $450, definitely fitting within the budget. And these are 16 inches wide, 6 inches tall, and 6.5 inches deep. So physically, they're absolutely going to fit. So if this is a matter of you really just did want to replace your Yamahas and is easily gonna not break the budget, and these have nice sound quality. The RSL speakers are good performing speakers. It would be an interesting kind of head-to-head to put them against your Yamahas, because I would predict you would hear a difference. I'm not sure if you would prefer them immediately, but these are pretty well-engineered speakers at a very, very affordable price. So, keeping in mind that we are talking to people besides just Lee with this segment, I want to mention that here is an option, right? If you've got to get that price point down, but you want something that is solid engineering, nice neutral response, and definitely not going to break the budget and has this sort of form factor, those RSL CG23M should be considered. And yeah, you could get 3 of those for $450.
Right on. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So next option that is going to physically fit and, not a mile away from those RSLs, NHT does have an option in their Super series, their least expensive series. Their Super Center 2.1 is coming in at 16 inches wide, 5.5 inches tall, and 6.5 inches deep. Very similar. Another MTM design, another pair of 4.5-inch woofers on either side of a tweeter, and $225 each is what's going on.
That's almost exactly what it looks like now in the living room. That's the kind of arrangement I have.
And these are a sealed speaker design, so we got no ports to deal with whatsoever in these.
Same.
And again, NHT always been known for very neutral response, nice, well-engineered speakers, but being their entry-level series, you're not getting their most expensive drivers or anything like that. But another option that people could keep in mind, again, plain black looks. You're not going to get anything particularly fancy there.
Now, for me, I do want to keep it just black.
Yeah.
If the towers were like black wood, like a shiny black ash wood.
Nah, it's just a plain matte black finish. And NHT does...
I'm just talking about my dream speaker. I could see a tower that looked all shiny black ash wood would be pretty cool. But I'll take a straight black.
Are your SVS subs the gloss or the black oak?
They're the black oak. Yeah, they're kind of matte finish black oak.
Yeah. So
and then what center channel are you using right now?
It's a Yamaha that matches
the towers.
Same tweeter as the big towers.
But obviously smaller woofer drivers.
Obviously.
No
yes,
15 inches in that center,
I think they're 5 1/4.
That'd be an engineering magic trick. But yeah, so I mean, NHT, they do have super towers, so those could potentially work if you really did want to go for the tower form factor, but they're kind of the very skinny, almost stick-like tower speakers in that series. RSL does not have any tower speakers, so that won't be an option there. So next option that I've come across here, and this is moving a little more upscale, at least in terms of looks, and then the brand name is Monitor Audio. They have their Radius series. So their Radius 200 is another LCR type of speaker. These ones are coming in at only 13 inches wide, so that's the narrowest of any of these, only 5 inches tall, only 6.5 inches deep. So physically, these are the smallest, and not surprisingly, they have the least amount of sheer output capability. These are not going to be tremendously loud speakers, but it's another option that physically fits, depending on the finish option, because there's black or white or kind of a rosewood type of finish option here. So either $450 to $475 each is the price point you're looking at here. You can use these as LCR, or they have the Radius 90 bookshelf speakers, which would only be $665 for a pair of those. So these will for sure fit within the budget range that you were looking for. There is not a Radius tower per se. They've got, Monitor Audio has plenty of tower options, ones that use the exact same tweeter and woofer materials as these Radius 200. So that is something that you could match, but there's not a Radius tower exactly for the completely matching series there. So now we're out of the realm of any of the center speakers that are definitely going to work inside of that cabinet space you have. The next ones I'm going to mention theoretically fit, but at the very least are going to require that you adjust the depth of that shelf or have these
see the
protruding.
Measurements coming up on this next one. I would kind of have to grease up the sides.
That's right.
It might very well fit.
So here is not one that I'm going to recommend to you, but for anyone else who's looking at these types of dimensions, Golden Ear's Super Center X, which out of their Super Center series is the smallest option, but this is coming in at 20 inches wide, so like Lee said, gonna have to grease it up to fit into the 20-inch width. 5 3/4 inches high, so it will fit. And even if it were sitting proud of the front of the cabinet, it can fit under that trim piece. But it is 11 inches deep, so either you're extending the shelf backward or having this, protrude out of the front. $795 each means that they're starting to push the budget as well. And then these are not an LCR design. This has a elliptical woofer firing out the top of this thing, which is another consideration of that's firing right into the cabinet,
right into the wood. Yeah.
But
for me, anyway,
these are coming with golden ears, folded ribbon tweeter. Golden ear, though, purposely not going for neutral linear sound. They have a character to their sound. There's no question about it. Many people like the sound. I happen to like the sound. I quite like, on first blush, listening to them, the type of character that they have, but that's not going to be everyone's taste and is not ruler flat linearity. They're not even aiming for that. So you could look at their matching bookshelf speakers, the Aeon 3s at $1,250 a pair, to just slightly break the $2,000 total budget for all three speakers, but you wouldn't be able to get any golden ear towers and fit within your budget. That's just not going to be an option here. And I just don't think this is really the right choice, but it was one where the dimensions could theoretically fit with what you're working with.
Yeah. It's that top firing woofer situation
I don't think
messes it up for me.
Quite what you're
that folded ribbon tweeter, that's not going to have quite the same dispersion as a dome or something else like that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So all around, probably not the right choice for Lee, but for anyone else who's like, I'm looking for those compact dimensions, it could potentially work. Now, this next one, Q Acoustics, they have what is, called the stereotypical British sound, which basically just means a little bit of a tilt in the mid bass to give it warmth, and a little bit of a purposeful treble roll-off to give it that BBC type of sound. So that is what they're going for, and they achieve it at a nice affordable price. The 5090 is the center speaker that would work out of Q Acoustics lineup, being 17 inches wide, no problem there, but exactly 6.5 inches tall. So it's going to have to squish, and then 9 3/4 inches deep, so you'd have to extend the depth. I mean, like I was saying, these are the ones that will technically fit into the dimensions that you talked about.
If they hung off by a couple few inches, they would sit there just fine.
Right.
I think.
So these are coming in $600 each. These could actually be used as an LCR. The logo isn't going to look quite right, but these can be utilized as an LCR if you want to. That'd be $1,800. But they have the matching 50/20 bookshelves at $900 a pair, so $1,500 total to get those three. And they do have 50/40 towers that match. Use the exact same driver complement, and the towers are $1,500 a pair. So we've broken the budget by $100. But if these really float your boat, they could be an option. Like this could theoretically work.
They are pretty.
Yes, they are.
I kind of dig that.
They have different finish options. They are rear ported though, so that's one other thing to consider. You're going to have to make some modifications to the back of that cabinet space if you went with these. But this is a potential
by the
option.
way, the cabinet's open in the back.
Right.
I don't know if I mentioned that. There's not a backing on this cabinet. It's open to the wall.
Still a cubby, though.
Plenty of space. It is a cubby. It does make a difference. But I like the look. But your description of the British sound sounds like what I have now.
Could be. That's not out of the question. Because, that was a very
like
popular studio sound. A lot of studios were going for that. Bowers and Wilkins, British sound, and that's more or less what Q Acoustics has targeted all along. Last one that I'll mention that definitely theoretically fits the dimensions. Again, the depth is what's going on here, but these are ones I definitely would consider. If you have a chance to audition these are ones that I think are worth a potential audition and trial, and that would be from Dali. Their Oberon series, the Vocal is the center in there. So this one's coming in 17.5 inches wide, no problem there. Exactly 6.5 inches tall, so a little squeaky with that piece of trim, and 11.5 inches deep. So
I guess I could get out the belt sander. And just the underside of the top.
That's right.
Take off a millimeter and
so a single front slot port on these. So no concerns there. The looks are, I think, a little bit ho-hum, kind of pretty plain.
A little techie.
Pretty plain black, a little techie, but, you're not really going to notice it once the grill is in place. So these are going for $600 each. These are not really meant to be an LCR type of design. The tweeter is offset vertically, so it'd be a little bit wasn't really intended to be used as an LCR. So you'd be looking at, they've got Oberon 1 bookshelves for $600 a pair, or the larger Oberon 3 bookshelves, which use a 7-inch driver, but those are $800 a pair, so you could certainly go with a bookshelf and center option here. Or they do have their Oberon 5 towers, again using the exact same driver complement at $1,300 a pair. So with the $600 center, we're under that $2,000 price point. And the sound quality on these Dali Oberons, I mean, it's a very neutral, very accurate sound. That is one that yeah, if you don't like any of the others or there's anything that puts them out, don't dismiss the dollies. They're ones I would consider. Tom's a fan of these as well. So yeah, they're not always the first to leap to mind, but those are ones I would consider. And
now I bet you're going to talk to me about ways I could do something that I haven't been thinking of.
Well, yeah, this is one of the first things that came to mind, which is you do have space on the top of this shelf. The TV
so we answered the question as it was written. Now we're going to give you better advice.
If you wanted to be able to fit an SVS Ultra Center up there, if you wanted to be able to fit what was actually my very first thought in terms of what I think is the maximum bang for buck in terms of sheer audio quality, not for looks, but for audio quality, the very first thought that came to mind. One of the options is to get my favorite brand. It doesn't have to be this brand, but my favorite brand of these is Pearl Smith for their universal TV stands. They go into the VESA mounts on the back of your TV. They act like a wall mount, but they attach to a pedestal stand that lets you swivel and lets you adjust the height. It's very, very handy. Lots of height adjustment here. You're using an LG OLED where the VESA mounting is kind of lower down, so it's kind of important to have that height adjustability. And I mean, you don't have to go nuts with it. It's just to give you enough height to put a center speaker on the top of this pedestal stand and have the TV elevated just above it where you're not blocking any of the image. I always recommend going for the larger size, the one that has like 3 sets of feet underneath these stands, because they do have smaller ones that carry less weight, but these will handle like 99 pounds. They're super rock solid. You're never going to have to worry about anything tipping over, and they're between $50 and $75 for the Pearl Smith ones, and I've used lots of them and they've been fantastic. So it's not going to break the budget, and it gives you the option of raising that center speaker height. So if that ever is a consideration, my very first thought when you talked about I want to get 3 new speakers is Ascend Acoustics CMT 340 SE2s. These are an LCR speaker. They're $420 each. There's a little price discount if you get 3 of them for $1,200. But in terms of just bang for the buck sound quality, these are another Klippel design and engineered by David Fabricant over there at Ascend Acoustics. And yeah, these are tremendous speakers in my opinion, but they are plain black and they're kind of big. You know, they're 21 inches wide, 7.5 inches high if it's horizontal, and 10.5 inches deep. So they're bigger, but Ascend also sells pedestal style stands where when you put them vertically and put them on those pedestal stands, they look like towers, but you have 3 identical speakers across the front and they really, really look like towers, and they're really, really nice. And you'd be able to afford those pedestal stands easily with that budget. So
yeah, it's going to be hard to talk me out of my little cubby. It throws off the look. It just does. And if you're going to pull something out of the little cubby and now it's getting featured on top of the stand, it better be a beautiful speaker.
Well, there we go. That's why we can talk about RBH's impression series here. We're going to mention it because that was the second thought in my mind. I'm like, oh, if the Ascends aren't going to work, it's going to be RBH. But RBH's impression 55i, or the ribbon tweeter version of it, which is the 55i. Those ones have dimensions
about these recently.
Of 17.5 inches wide, 6 3/4 inches high, so they're just a little too tall for that cubby, and 10.6 inches deep, a little bit more than 10.5. So the issue there is that little bit of height. They're just not gonna quite work for that little bit of height.
Why couldn't I see the future when I was building this thing in the 2000s?
That's right. But you've got the black satin finish as an option, the white satin finish as an option, so they look a little nicer than the Ascends, although they're not super fancy, but they do have a little bit nicer finish option. Now, if you go with the dome tweeter version, those are $450 each. If you go with the upgraded folded ribbon tweeter version, those are $775 each. So if you got 3 of the 55IR with the folded ribbon tweeters, that would break the budget. You're up to $2325 now. But of course, you can get the 5IR bookshelf speakers, so you get a pair of those plus the 55IR center, and now you're at $1925. We've fit within the budget if we do it that way, and you get the folded ribbon tweeters that way, and all of the fast transient response that comes along with those, that clarity and the trebles. So I mean, those were all the options that came to mind for me. And I think out of those, it sounded like just in your reactions, Lee, that there was like a couple you were like, yeah, those seem like mark it down, maybe have a look at those.
Yeah, I mean, the Ascend Acoustics,
the first ones, the Sierras.
I'm willing to give that a look. As there's a couple others in there, I want to look at. So we'll see. I'm going to have to sit and stare real hard to see if I can stand pulling the center out of my little cubby. And I don't think I will if I can help it. I mean, if there's a way around it, and even if I have to spend a little bit more to get everything to fit, there's a certain look I was shooting for. And if you change an element of it, it does throw things off, right? So like all of a sudden, you're getting a stand to lift the TV up, and now there's a different shape on top of the low slung, wide, perfect little rectangle that the stand is. It just starts getting a little weird. So I don't know. The Ascend jumps out at me. Maybe I need to find somewhere I can hear it.
Yeah.
But I would also argue that you're I understand being hung up on the aesthetics of it, but having three identical sounding speakers, ideally three identical totally speakers, is going to give you a much better audio experience. You're going to enjoy the movies that much more. When the lights are off, you're not going to be looking at it. So
the lights are really never completely off.
You can get some nice speaker stands. That's always an option.
True. So this is just going to require some staring and thinking and holding a picture up, and maybe some augmented reality if I can do that and try to
build a
really
cardboard box model.
Yeah, but honestly, the key in this kind of situation, and this is what makes it tough when you're in a smaller town, and there's got to be a lot of listeners and viewers in the same situation, is it's that ability to hear, to see and hear, and to experience and tell if there's enough of a difference for me to go for it.
Yeah.
Is there enough of a difference where I go, okay, I need to take it out of the cubby? Or is there enough of a difference like with those Ascends where I go, I can fit in the cubby and I just need to save up more?
And that's
but I love it so much.
Right? I feel like the exercise of what we just went through is helpful because it's like from every possibility in the universe, we've winnowed it down to what's physically even worth considering. And then from there, it's like, okay, you get your 2 or 3 that kind of stand out to you as your top candidates. And that lets you manage what you're going to audition. And it lets you manage the costs associated with finding ways to audition. So I just like going through that process publicly because there are going to be people in very similar situations. But even if it's a different one, it's like, yeah, it's nice to see the thought process, I think. I think that's the fun of going through it on a podcast like this.
So yeah, I guess as I look back, I liked the Q Acoustics look a little bit.
Yeah.
I favor minimalistic looks. I don't mind the little curved edges. Although when it gets in a cubby, you're not going to see the curved edges as much.
But you'll see the left and rights.
You're definitely gonna see those, and if you get like a tower speaker from them, you're gonna see that.
And it does have a tower option from them. That's true.
That's right. So Ascend, the Q Acoustics. I need to look harder at
maybe
those.
The dollies.
And,
that could be an option.
Yes, maybe so. So I did. Those weren't too bad, but again, those look a little. I don't know how to put it. A little
industrial.
Industrial. Maybe that's the word. A little too techie industrial. Maybe.
Well, I think we've given Lee plenty to chew on, and
I've got things to think about, and I got to find a way to hear some of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I need to know if it makes me want to spend more or change anything. I need to know.
So with that,
I'm going to Atlanta at the end of December.
Okay.
Maybe I can talk my wife into some time at a high-end audio store.
Not necessarily high-end. None of these are like ridiculously crazy overpriced. So that's part of the goal there as well.
Well, anything compared to the Tuscaloosa Best Buy is high-end.
Okay, fair enough by that criteria. So, why don't we tackle some of these questions that we got on this list? And since Lee and I have been dominating the conversation for the past little while, Joe, why don't I get you to read our first question here?
Question number 1 from Brad. Brad is using an Onkyo TX-RZ50 receiver, and he's been getting by with just 5 speakers until now. He doesn't have any surround back speakers, and his pair of surrounds are positioned about plus or minus 110 degrees, and they are about 4 feet down from the ceiling. He'd like to try Atmos now, so he's trying to figure out the best way to add 4 Atmos overhead speakers to his setup. He's got some placement restrictions, so the farthest back that he can install a pair of in-ceiling speakers is basically directly above his seats. Those would be top middles, right?
Absolutely. Yep, correct.
The other pair can go basically anywhere in front of his seats. So what would be best? Should he use another pair of in-ceiling speakers positioned just in front of his screen? Or should he get wedge-shaped speakers and mount them high on the front wall on either side of his screen? Would it actually be better to just stop at only 2 overhead speakers? Should a single pair of overhead speakers maybe go halfway between his seats and the screen? And now, And how should his overhead speakers be identified and labeled in his RZ50 setup menu?
See, I'm not the only one with placement restrictions.
That's right. Oh, definitely not. And this is not end of the world restrictions. This is very workable. Right. So I mean, right off the bat, I'm going to say if you can do 4 overhead speakers, do 4 overhead speakers. If you're forced to
100%.
stop at 2, so be it. But that's not the case here. You've got the processing power. You've got the amplification on hand. You don't even have to add additional amplification because you're using 5 floor level speakers. So this is going to be a 9 speaker setup total. And if you don't have 4 overhead speakers, then all you can do is steer overhead sounds left and right. With a single pair, all you can do is move them left and right. You can't get any front to back movement in that overhead layer of sounds. So as long as you have something that's somewhere vaguely in front of you and somewhere vaguely behind you, or at least audibly farther back than the ones that are in front of you, which is the sort of condition that we're looking in here, then by all means go for the 4 speakers, as long as, budget is not a problem. Don't put yourself into debt over it, because it's not worth that. The Atmos effects are probably not worth going into debt over. But if this is no problem financially, then go for the 4 overhead speakers. So I don't have any problem with your rearmost overhead speakers being a pair of top middles that are basically right above you. I'm perfectly fine with that. Joe, though, you've had experiences with all kinds of different setups. So
so even in my theater just outside the room here, my rear speakers are kind of in between my first and second row of seats.
Okay.
But I do have them set up as top rears currently.
Okay.
I'm experimenting.
As far as the label goes, yeah.
Correct. And if I'm sitting in the front seat and I recline those, they are still just a little bit behind me, but I have those set as rears, and that works well. I agree. You absolutely need to do 4 in-ceiling overhead speakers if you want the left to right, front to back type of panning for the Atmos effect. So don't stop at 2 of those. I don't think I'd want to do on wall up front and in back if I can do in-ceiling. I prefer that they actually come from where I expect that to sound from.
Okay. In terms of labels, the thing to keep in mind is if you label the speakers, forget about the diagrams and the way that the labels for the names line up with, the positions in the diagrams. Because really we're dealing with, this sound is in front and to the left, behind and to the right, and it's a more or less that vague, and that's really all you need to achieve in your overhead layer when you're dealing with the 4 overheads. But the way that the processing works is if they're labeled as heights, then for both Atmos and DTS-X, what you'll get is fully discrete overhead sounds. So anything that's in that overhead layer, if you've labeled them as heights, it'll be strictly out of those overhead speakers. There'll be no attempting to blend it between the overhead layer and the floor layer, the ear level layer. If they're labeled as heights, then both Atmos and DTS-X will treat them as fully discrete layers and just play the sounds discretely out of those speakers. So for that reason, I tend to label my overhead speakers kind of regardless of where they're placed as front heights and rear heights. The processing just works most discreetly across both of the major immersive audio formats. If you label them as tops, so top front and top rear, Atmos works as expected, but DTS will attempt to blend the overhead layer with the floor layer because they're actually expecting height speakers. That's what DTS-X is designed to work with in the chip-based decoders. And so it attempts to create a phantom height by blending the sound of the top front with the front main and the top rear with the surround back if you have them. It tries to create a phantom height speaker in between them, and it just kind of messes up the discrete sound effects. It's supposed to be kind of 2 discrete layers, the ear layer and the overhead layer. So for that reason, I tend to kind of avoid labeling things as tops if heights are an option, but the top middle is an exception. The top middle, it does treat that as those speakers are directly above you, and then you either have another pair that's in front of those or behind those, and it doesn't really give you a choice. If you've labeled top middles, your only choice is front heights or rear heights. There's no option to choose top fronts or top rears if you have top middles and you've got 4 speakers total. It's different when you've got 6 speakers total, but with 4 speakers total, there's no option. It's top middles and front heights in this case, because you said you can't put any speakers any farther back. So The choice of labels has been determined for you. That's really no option about it. It's going to be top, middles, and front heights. So now the only question is, are we going for wedge-shaped speakers that are front heights high up on the front wall, or are they in-ceiling speakers? I wouldn't do them halfway between your seats and the screen. They'd be in-ceiling speakers that are, closer to the front of your room, where front heights are meant to be. So yeah, I mean, Joe, you expressed your opinion that you wouldn't really go for the wedge-shaped speakers, the front heights.
So I would say, for in-ceiling speakers, okay. And I would worry about the labeling and aspects of it after you get the 4 speakers in the ceiling.
Sure.
For the front set, I would go however far forward you go, go that. However high up you're going, go that far forward. Right? That'll put it at 45 degrees. So if you've got 8-foot ceilings, you're sitting about 3 feet. If you go 5 feet up, go 5 feet forward, and that's probably about where I would put those front speakers. The rear ones, middle ones, I'd put those as far back as you can.
Which
and
is
then
directly
I would,
overhead in this case.
But then I would get a piece of content that has good Atmos or has good DTSX, and I'd play around with it. I'd label them as different things, hook them up.
You can try it, yeah, because you can try labeling them as front heights and rear heights. It doesn't care about that.
They can be front tops. They can be front heights, whatever it's going to be, and just see which ones you like the effect on better. I'm not sure that I would use a middle label. I would probably use a front and a rear label anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I will say just from my experience, when you do have actual physical front height speakers, wedge-shaped speakers mounted high up on your front wall, those have been, in my experience thus far, the least noticeable speakers in an entire system.
It's like the old Yamaha Presence speakers.
It is, yeah. Even rear height speakers I have noticed more as just existing versus front height speakers. It all just kind of blends into that front sound stage, and I'm like, am I really getting anything out of those front height speakers? I can get up closer to them and confirm that they are in fact working. But yeah, front heights tend to be hard to notice. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're like me and you care less about noticing your overhead speakers and care more about the intended effect of Atmos, of it just being atmospheric, just giving you a sense of envelopment but not really pinpoint noticing, then that does work overall. But if most people, they add new speakers to the system, they kind of want to notice them a little bit, and I would lean more strongly towards Joe's advice if that's the case.
And even the triangulation of the sound, right? If you've got your left speaker, your left front height speaker, and your left surround speaker, I think bringing it more into the room as opposed to keeping it on the wall is going to give you more flexibility with the depth and the perception of that sound.
Okay. I think we covered that one. Lee, you want to take the next question?
Oh, sure. Chris H. has a question. So, a little while ago, Chris bought himself a 55-inch Hisense U7K TV. The price was nice, and the reviews on it seemed quite positive. But he hasn't been entirely happy with it, so he's going to return it. The local dimming feature seemed kind of slow to react, like he could see the image brightening and dimming, and that was with the local dimming feature set as high as it could go. He also noticed vignetting around the edges and corners.
Yeah, I'll just on that tip mention that the local dimming set to medium is actually the least noticeable in terms of that pumping effect of seeing.
Really?
Yeah, the medium is the most you're not going to notice it working itself in the background. It's kind of like the old dynamic irises on projectors. If you actually set them to their highest setting, you might notice them pumping more than if you set it on the medium setting. It's actually moving slower, but because it's moving slower, you notice the change less, ironically that way. So on that one thing, setting it to medium might actually help that one particular complaint. But the thing about the vignetting around the edges and just the overall image quality, that's not going to change. So given what he's going to ask, I'm all on board with what he's going to ask about specifically. But that one thing about the local dimming, I would say, it's worth trying it on medium.
Right. Okay, that's weird. So while he was trying to avoid paying a higher price, he figures he's going to just bite the bullet and get himself an OLED to finally have the picture quality that he really wants. Yes, that's what you do.
Yes.
He's got a 27-inch OLED computer monitor in his bedroom, and he's found himself watching that more than the 55-inch TV in his TV room with the nice surround sound.
Yeah.
I don't blame you. So, with it being Black Friday season, he's seen some of the sale prices. He's well aware that a larger screen size would be even nicer, but he can truly only fit a 55-inch into his current space and setup. You sure? Are you sure? Because you know what these guys are saying to me about my center channel. Have you considered another way to do it? because you're not going to hate bigger, and the 65-inch is the best bang for the buck right now.
It is.
The best price he's seen so far on the 55-inch B3 OLED from last year's LG lineup. That's the best price he's seen is on that one. He knows there are higher end OLED models and newer ones too, but is the B3 an okay purchase? Any reason to avoid it? It's fantastic. Especially if you're used to a Hisense LCD that you're hating, that's vignetting, and it's the edge lighting is bad and the dimming is bad.
And
if you've been watching that,
computer monitor is the OLED you've been watching, because the TV's actually, like, if we're talking, peak nit light output and that type of thing, they actually beat the OLED monitors on those types of fronts. So even
it just doesn't matter unless you've got lights just shining directly on the TV. No, it's fine. I mean, I have a B8 from 2018 that I bought in early 2019, and it's not like I sit around going, "Oh man, these terrible shadows, I can't stand." It's not like I'm like, "Oh, it's so dim, I can't see anything on the TV." It's going to be amazing. I think that B level OLED. Unless somebody comes to me and says, "Look, I really want to pixel peep," as you said earlier, Rob, it matters to me every little bit. Then I'm pointing them to the higher end models. But man, if you're coming from anything like you describe, that B3 is going to be fantastic. And it's such a good deal. I think that's what, 1,000 right now, or 800?
Oh no, it's like around 750 right now. So that's
750.
Yeah.
The last time I saw was like, maybe it was 800 somewhere. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Come on. 750 for that. Yeah. Do it. Just do it.
Yeah. I mean, he asked, is there any reason to avoid it? And the only one I can think of is you have 3 or 4 HDMI 2.1 sources that require the full 48 gigabits per second bandwidth to be plugged in. Because if you have 3 or 4 of those, then the B3 only has 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and 2 HDMI 2.0 ports. The B4 from 2024 now has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports. But the B3 was still back in the days of 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and 2 HDMI 2.0 ports. I don't think that is going to be the reason that Chris needs to avoid it. But was there any reason? And that is the only one I can come up with, because the B3 was basically the equivalent of a C2 from 2022. They kind of brought the chips along from the C2 and put them into the B3. So it actually retained some of those service menu features that went away when they got to the C3 and the C4. So some of the service menu features where you can turn off any of the automatic image dimming, they were still present in the B3 when they had gone away in the C3, and people were snapping up C2s so they could still get that service menu access. So yeah, the B3 is a great OLED. You're going to love it. Get it. That's
such a good deal. I guess maybe the B4 was what I saw at 800 to 1,000.
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah,
that must be it. But
so
yeah, man, that's
already for sure at a minimum 2 votes to 1 if Joe feels differently about it. But what's Joe's feeling on him maybe getting it?
Yeah, I think no problem with any of the LG OLEDs. And this is a case of, buy once, cry once, get the thing you want. Don't stick with that old Hisense. And then the other thing is you're not going to be doing an A-B comparison once you get it in the house, right? You're going to be watching that TV and you're not going to be looking at another TV next to it trying to say,
a G4 can produce higher peak nits. That is a factual thing, but you're not going to have a G4 sitting right beside it and comparing those scenes. So the B3 is still going to have its wonderful OLED contrast, and no regrets there. Well, why don't I go ahead and read a question? Because A, it's really, really short, this next one, and B, we'll just go around in the rounds. Why not? So Rich asks, right now, the 83-inch LG B4 OLEDs that I just mentioned, and the new 85-inch Sony Bravia 7 mini LED backlit QLED TVs. They are the exact same price. 83-inch LG B4 OLED, 85-inch Sony Bravia 7 QLED. Which one's better? Simple question. Which one's better, Joe? Which one's better, Lee?
So, the processing in the Sonys has gotten better and better as they've gone. But I think that LG is your, go-to gold standard for OLED. Most of the panels they're manufacturing, the ones that, Sony and Samsung are oftentimes using. On the other hand, the Sony is 2 inches bigger, so that is better.
That is something.
In my opinion, this is no contest. OLED all the way.
Sure.
The Bravia 7. I mean, look, the mini LED backlit, full array local dimming, quantum dot LCD TVs, they have gotten better and better. No question about it. If you got one and you weren't comparing it to anything, it's not like you're going to go, well, that's an ugly TV. Far from it. It's a really, really nice looking TV. But like by all the reviews, the Bravia 7 there's no magic going on. It's like they got a Bravia 9 above it. It's not the flagship QLED in Sony's lineup. And it's like the OLED just beats it, in my opinion. I think it's, if you do see them side by side, you're like, oh, that one's better. The LG B4 is better.
Especially if you see it in a human situation, like not in a big, wildly lit store. Yeah,
even that
absolutely.
People are so worried about this light output thing that's gotten into everyone's brain that OLEDs are dim and QLEDs are bright, and it's just not true. It's just not true. You know, like the maximum peak light output on a little 1% test pattern. Can the Bravia 7 produce 2,000 nits while the B4 produces about 1,100? Yes, that's a factual statement. But it's like you're not watching a 1% test pattern. You're watching regular content where the B4 looks every bit as bright as the Bravia 7. And when you're watching HDR, OLEDs look more stunning than full array local dimming LCDs because the contrast is perfect. And you can have a white 1,000 nit pixel right beside a 0 nit black pixel, and the LCDs can't do that. They just can't do it under any circumstance.
Amen.
Get the OLED.
You always get the OLED unless there's some compelling reason to not get the OLED.
Sure.
When people ask my advice on what TV to get nowadays, I start with a 65-inch LG OLED.
Right.
I just said 65-inch LG OLED.
It's going to cover
Tell
a
me
lot
about
of
your
bases.
room now. Now that I've said that, now tell me about your room. Then we see if there's a reason they don't get that.
It's one
Usually
size
it just
fits
need
most.
a bigger one. Yeah, most, yeah.
Right.
Unless they can fit the 83-inch and have the budget for it. So I guess Joe's up for the next one?
Sure, why not?
Okay, question number 4 from Raf in Australia. Good day, mate, from down under. First up, Raf appreciated us warning him away from the Arylic wall-mountable cube speakers last week. He did not buy those.
Good.
But he also did not buy the Paradigm Cinema 100 satellite speakers that we suggested in their place. Instead, he just bought another pair of KEF Q50A wedge-shaped speakers and mounted them up high on his side walls. So now he has 6 of those KEF wedge-shaped speakers acting as front heights, rear heights, and surround heights, top middles, regardless of what they're called. They sound great to him.
Okay.
Hooray.
So good to hear that.
I give a thumbs up to that. Yeah, he's like, whatever, I'll pay the price and just get actual 6 matching speakers over it.
Right on.
All right, 6 identical speakers.
That's
Great way to go. Now on to his question. He was using a 77-inch Sony A9G OLED in his theater room. He decided he wanted something bigger. So he moved that OLED to his lounge and got himself a 98-inch TCL C855 mini LED QLED.
Now, here's where saying get the OLED, there is definitely a mitigating factor there because that is a massive difference in price.
Size
if you went
matters.
for the 97-inch OLED, you're not going to get it at the same price as the TCL 98-inch TV. That is leagues apart.
So, Rob, what's the closest model to that in North America?
So the closest you would actually get, even though the C855 did come out in 2024, it would be closest to the 2023 QM8 or QM850. Those are really, really close in specs and performance. The C855 in Australia, and they also sell that in UK and parts of Europe. It's really, really close to the QM850 from 2023 in the North American lineup.
Okay. Overall, he is very happy with it, but he's noticed an issue when using its built-in streaming apps. Netflix and Amazon Prime seem to have judder. He can eliminate the judder by turning up the motion smoothing, but then the soap opera effect is very noticeable, so that's no good.
Yeah.
Is there any way to get rid of the judder? Would using an external streaming box like an Apple TV 4K solve this issue?
Well,
guys?
the second part, yes. if you already have an Apple TV 4K, then use that and turn on its match frame rate feature, and you won't have any judder problems anymore that way. I have to ask you guys, because I can't remember, is Australia on 50 hertz or are they on 60 hertz when it comes to their refresh rates?
50. Aren't they PAL? They're either PAL or CK. I don't think they're NTSC.
Where's Tom when you need him?
I know, right? He lived there and he would be able to confirm. But yeah, it was in the back of my mind that, I mean, again, because they do share those model numbers with the UK and other parts of Europe, I think they are on the 50 hertz system. So
yeah, they're 50 hertz PAL.
Yeah, I would venture a guess that that's maybe what's going on here, that the internal apps, TCL didn't bother. They're just still sending it the 60 hertz streaming signal, but the television is converting it to 50 or 100, and you're getting that judder as a result, right?
Well,
that would cause it.
I got to imagine that the capabilities of the box, if you use something like an Apple TV, the processor and that's going to be so much stronger than what they're going to build into a TV. So I think long term, that's going to give you a much better results. Also, if you have Apple TVs in other rooms in the house, that's a more consistent user experience for other family members. So I like the idea of the Apple TV in this. Guys, I'm going to bow out for 1 minute. I'll be right back.
Oh, sure. No problem. We'll welcome you back when you're here. So yeah, well, I think that pretty much covers that one, because that really is the way I would go on that. And it's not crazy to get yourself a nice streaming box. You're going to have a better experience all around with that. Anyway.
That solves that problem, doesn't it? I mean, pretty quickly. But yeah, so that, I bet you're right on that. TCL just only having the one processing settings that could be.
I have a suspicion about that. Yeah. Because what we're getting there is a mismatch between the incoming frame rate from the streaming service and the display frame rate. That's what results in the judder there. So yeah, I wouldn't want the soap opera effect either. So when the solution is as simple as I get myself a nice streaming box and everything about it works more smoothly, then that's what I'd do.
Perfect. Let's see what Derek needs. Derek says he is a relatively new listener of our podcast. Hello, Derek.
Hello.
I'm not here every week usually. He probably is thinking I'm just the regular guy.
It could be,
right?
yes. If it's new listener, that could be the case.
If he's new. But we already helped him figure out some of his acoustic treatment options. That's fantastic. So he figured he'd ask us directly about his projection screen setup. He's using an Epson LS12000 projector, and he will be installing a 120-inch screen.
Good.
Due to some placement restrictions,
Yup.
That's the theme. That's the name of this episode is restrictions. The projector will need to be physically closer to the screen towards its wide angle range of its zoom. The lens will be about 1.4x to 1.5x the width of the screen away.
Yeah.
Okay. For critical movie viewing, he can turn off all of the lights and have a very dark room. Cool. But about half the time, there will be some ambient light present coming from the sides of the room. It'll be dim, but definitely not pitch black. The seating area that he cares about spans about a 50-degree arc in front of the screen. So, after doing his research, he's leaning towards getting Seymour AV's matinee wide ambient light rejecting screen material. As the name implies, it offers a wider viewing angle than their matinee black material, and Seymour AV says that will work much better with his relatively short throw distance from the lens of the projector. It seems most other ALR materials recommend a long throw distance for the best and most uniform looking results. The matinee wide also has a 0.9 gain, which should avoid any hot spotting. And he figures it shouldn't be any problem at the 120-inch screen size with the light output capabilities of his LS12000. But Derek recently found he can get a 40% discount on Seymour Screen Excellence, Screen Innovations, and Stewart Film Screen purchases. They would all still be more expensive than buying directly from Seymour AV. But not nearly as much as without the discount. So, should he be looking to buy any of those instead? Is the Seymour AV Matinee Wide exactly the same as the Seymour Screen Excellence Ambient Visionaire 0.9 that appears to have identical specs? Let's just start right there.
Okay. I don't know for 100% sure because between the Seymour AV and the Seymour Screen Excellence, Chris Seymour himself has said that there are some differences, even in the ones that appear very, very similar or even identical in the specs. He's sometimes said that the materials aren't actually literally identical, but I don't know for sure on that Matinee Wide versus the Ambient Visionaire 0.9. That one, I kind of suspect literally is the same material because they took a while finding and developing that matinee wide material. I don't know, Joe, do you have any info on that one?
If the specs are identical, the performance should be identical.
Well, yeah, that's just it. Yeah, so even if for some reason, like maybe they're, manufactured in two different locations but to the same specifications, then yeah, I mean the performance should be the same between those two things. Yeah.
So that sounds like a save the money choice.
Yeah, because I mean it's more about the frame options there, right? Seymour Screen Excellence has some alternate frame options versus Seymour AV Direct, but I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Like the Seymour AV screens, the frames on them are really nice. If you want them seamless, right? Because one of the reasons that Seymour AV can send you and sell you screens less expensively than the Seymour Screen Excellence is that they will, have like a 2-part for the bottom and top.
It's a 6-piece frame, not a 4-piece frame.
Yeah. So if you want the absolutely seamless frame, then that's where the Seymour Screen Excellence would come in. But you're paying the extra cost to get that, and the material itself is not going to perform any different.
So he also asks, what about, say, a Stewart Firehawk or a Screen Innovations Black Diamond or Slate? He'd appreciate any advice we can offer. Do those offer any better performance for his particular situation?
So, I mean, the Firehawk, what are they on now? G4? G5? I don't know. They're up to some generation there. I think it's at least G4. But that was one of the sort of original gray screens with gain. That was sort of one of the original designs. So that one is definitely one where you'd want to have as long a throw distance as you possibly can. And it is prone to having some hot spotting here and there. So given that it's more expensive and all of that, it probably wouldn't be the one I would point you to here when the Seymours are readily available to you. The Screen Innovations, I've never personally been a gigantic fan of the Black Diamond because I can definitely see hot spotting on the Black Diamond.
Yeah, those will sparkle.
Yeah, they will do that. And the Slate is really just a gray screen. It's just straight up a gray screen. But Screen Innovations has a brand new material. It's really expensive, but it's the Black Diamond Fusion. Where they've taken a bunch of the technology from the company Carbon Black, but then taken some of their own Black Diamond technology and they've fused them together for this new Black Diamond Fusion material. And it's really, really impressive looking, but it's really, really expensive. So even with a 40% discount, you're still looking at about 3 times the price of the Seymour AV. I don't know if...
No.
Yeah, that's what you were looking to do. It's a very impressive material, but it's also for worse ambient light conditions than what you described. It's for like, I've got full lights on in my room and I just need to have a viewable image and have the black levels retained as much as I can. Yeah.
It sounds like Derek did exactly the step-by-step analysis we would want him to do.
Like I've really liked Seymour AV's ambient light rejecting screens like that. That matinee black is really impressive. It just does have narrow viewing angles. That is certainly the drawback to it. If you're sitting off to the sides, you can tell the light output drops off of that. The light reflectance drop off of that very noticeably. But the matinee wide, yeah, I'd be pretty okay with that choice. I mean, I know Tom is still going to say, dude, just always turn the lights out and get a white screen.
Yeah, so I was going to bring up the same thing. He's jumping right into an ambient light rejecting.
Yeah.
And I made a similar mistake with the first screen. I had a Firehawk Gen 1 and in a dedicated theater room, went with that thinking that, there might be times when games are on and things like that we want a little bit of light in the room. And I was using a DLP projector at the time, so it worked out fine, but I did find a better picture when I went to a white screen and realized, hey, my lights it's pretty dark in here most of the time.
Right.
And that Epson LS12000 is a great projector. It's very bright. It's got a lot of output. So I don't think really, I mean, it should do a great job, but I would say, can you find a way to get it dark most of the time when you're watching and consider a white screen? I've always gone kind of by the advice of, date your projector and marry your screen, right? You're going to keep that screen up a lot longer and projectors are going to change out over time. And you're talking to a guy who's I'm looking at a Stewart screen over there. I've got a Seymour AV screen down in the garage that's going to go into another project. So they're both building good quality products. I do think that the Stewart is the gold standard again of, screens that are out there. their technology's far and away, the best. Their build quality is superior, but you are going to pay for that.
Yeah.
And as someone who's going to, build this one time and hang it up on a wall and keep it there for a long time, I don't think that there's anything wrong with going with that Seymour AV piece also.
Yeah. It's a little bit tough because this one isn't a case where I can say it's as simple as get samples beforehand, because the small sample patch of the Matinee Wide doesn't really show you what the full size screen ends up looking like, because it's so dependent on angles, like where the ambient light you're trying to reject is coming from, exactly where that projector is set up, because yes, the Matinee Wide can deal with a shorter throw distance better, but if you're talking about a really steep vertical angle as well, like if your projector is ceiling mounted flush to your ceiling, so it's dealing with a steep angle vertically and a close angle throw distance wide, I'm like, I just want to get a white screen at that point. I would 100% want to do that. If you're able to drop the height of the projector down on an extension tube and like just clear your sight line and give it less of a vertical angle to deal with, then that, like the Matinee Wide is a very nice screen material. It'll probably deal with the setup that you talked about with sort of best, certainly in terms of value, I would say probably best it's dealing with it. But I'm like, I end up going more towards Tom and Joe's approach here of it's like, can we just black out the room 70% of the time and only 30% of the time is there any ambient light and we just get a really nice white screen? Because I think that might be the very best solution here. So yeah, there you go. One of those two. I'll go ahead and read Carlos's question because it's my turn. Carlos just got himself an LG C3 OLED. My goodness, people are getting themselves LG OLEDs all around. He was hoping to achieve, a very accurate image for standard dynamic range content that strictly adheres to the industry standards. So that means 100 nits for official peak white and then a maximum of 120 nits for the above white information if we're showing that super white info. So he wasn't able to find a conclusive measurement-based suggestion for what that OLED pixel brightness setting ought to be in order to achieve exactly 100 nits peak white in the signal there. Do we happen to know what that OLED pixel brightness setting should be? He tried reaching out to ask someone at LG directly, but it seems like getting someone to respond with a knowledgeable answer is impossible over at LG. So what should it be? He comes to us for the answer. Anybody know?
There isn't one number that is the perfect number. Otherwise, they would just set it to that.
Well, I mean, they don't. There's a tiny little bit of unit-to-unit variation, but it should be on an LG C3. It should be either 8 or 9. And it's not going to be a world of difference going there. In fact, very often, if people are using the 2.4 gamma, they'll set it to 9. If they're using the 2.2 gamma, they'll set it to 8. It's that kind of a difference. But it should be either 8 or 9 in that pixel brightness setting. That should correspond to 100 nits is your peak white. Yeah.
I wish I could easily look at mine. I can't remember.
I'm sure
you got it. I said it one time and forgot it.
Most people find a setting of about 12 to 14 to be very, very comfortable for a dim room setting. But if you're talking pitch black setting, then technically it should be either 8 or 9. It should be one of those two settings there. I don't know if Joe's experience has been different though. That's been the one I've come across.
Haven't played with the OLEDs much myself, but if you're this into it and you really want to consider maybe have a calibrator come out,
that's the thing.
You seem like someone who might appreciate what they could do for you.
They will nail it. Or the other option is you could get yourself a nice little package from Calman from Portrait Displays, because in terms of like measuring 100 nits very accurately, their C6 meter and their Calman home software will definitely nail that part of it for you. So that could be an option too, if that's the thing that you really, really care about there and you want to play around with some home calibration with an actual meter, measuring things in actual proper software to do it, not just eyeballing this thing. But if you don't want to mess with any of that cost of any of it, 8 or 9. It'll get you really, really close. All right. I think it's Joe's turn to read something, yeah?
Next question comes from Nick. Nick thanked us for talking him through the best way to connect his new PS5 Pro to his Denon X3600H receiver and LG C9 OLED. They're OLED. With the PS5 Pro plugged directly into the TV as we instructed, the PlayStation's menu does seem to indicate that every high-end video output feature is now compatible and available. So that's a success.
Hooray!
Hey.
On the audio side of things, the PS5 Pro only seems to want to output uncompressed 7.1 PCM, when he's playing games. But he's read online that Atmos output for games should be available now. So how does he get that? He would like to make use of his full 724 speaker setup if possible.
Yeah, so I mean, fairly straightforward in terms of what are the settings you need to activate. This is available now, so you go into your PS5 Pro settings, you go to the sound audio output adjustments, and you go to the audio format priority setting. And there you can choose uncompressed PCM or Atmos. But there's a little bit of a wiggle to this, because it is not just outputting a direct Atmos bit stream from the game. That's not what's going on with the PS5 Pro's Atmos output. It is decoding the audio in the game, running it through the Tempest 3D Sony audio processing, and then sticking that processed audio into an Atmos container and sending it out to your AV receiver. So people who have compared the actual Atmos authored audio from games that are available on both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X are like, sounds don't come out identically, because the one that was originally programmed in Atmos in the Xbox versus this decoded, then processed by the Tempest 3D audio, then put into an Atmos container of the Sony is not identical results. So it's a little bit questionable whether you really want Atmos output for games from the Sony PlayStation 5 Pro, because your other option is output the uncompressed, straight decoded 5.1 or 7.1 PCM like it's always wanted to, and then just use your receivers up mixing, because it'll do a very good job with that Dolby Surround up mixing, or your DTS-X up mixing, or your Oro 3D up mixing if you prefer that. Like, you're either way, it's processed audio. It's not, like originally discrete decoded directly into Atmos audio either way. So you can kind of play with this. There's no direct right or wrong answer. Yeah. So that's the
So this is another
complication.
experiment until you like it situation.
Yeah. I kind of tend to prefer just letting it output its PCM audio, because there are glitches. There's still glitches going on with the audio in these consoles. Both the PS5 and the Xbox, they're still having glitches sometimes. And I'm just like, just give me the PCM audio. I'll up mix it, because apparently these PCs in console form can't handle it without glitches once in a while. It's very dumb.
So part B of his question, would he benefit from also plugging his Apple TV 4K and Ultra HD Blu-ray player directly into his TV, rather than having those devices plugged into his Denon X3600H receiver?
No reason to plug them straight into the TV. The reason the PS5 Pro needed to go directly into TV is because your X3600H will not pass through the full 4K 120 hertz, the full 40, or in the case of the PS5 Pro, it's still 32 gigabits per second. But your X3600H is old enough that it was limited to the 18 gigabits per second, tops out at 4K at 60 hertz. But your Apple TV 4K and your Ultra HD Blu-ray player, they're never going above 60 hertz. They're never going above 18 gigabits per second, so those can remain plugged into your Denon. The PS5 Pro is plugged into your TV, so it can do 4K at 120 hertz for the handful of games that actually do that on a PlayStation. Yeah.
So, my turn to read one, I guess, if I'm keeping up with the little round robin here.
Yeah.
Okay, David has some questions. This is a long one. David just recently completed the expansion of his Atmos speaker setup to a full 7.2.4 configuration, and he's absolutely loving it so far.
Hooray!
Fantastic. We had recommended the Sonus Mag series in-ceiling speakers from Best Buy, along with their retrofit rear enclosures, so he snagged 2 pairs of those when they were on sale, and we did not steer him wrong. Hey, he couldn't be happier with it. Man, that's good to hear.
It is.
All right. He also got a, is it a Fosse?
Fosse.
It's Fosse. See, it should have 2 S's if it's Fosse. He also got a Fosse TDA 7498E 2-channel amplifier on our advice, and it is happily powering the extra 2 speakers that his Denon X4300H receiver could not power itself. He went with the monoprice 12 gauge in-wall rated speaker wire we suggested. Can't say that made any audible difference. Okay, sure. But it's nice to know it has the proper in-wall rating.
Well, that's what it's all about. And your insurance company likes that it has the proper in-wall rating too. That's really what counts.
That's the big difference. Yeah, you're not going to know. I mean, unless you have a kilometer long run of speaker wire.
Even then, man.
Even then, probably not. So just before we get to his questions, he just wanted to give his recommendation for some fiberglass fish tape rods that he found on Amazon. He didn't have easy ceiling access in his basement, so these fiberglass fish tape rods were a lifesaver for him while routing 8 new in-wall speaker wire runs, a couple of them up to 30 feet. So that's pretty cool. I've only ever used the metal kind that are hard to get back on the reel, and you have to stuff it back in there. Yeah.
Now these are about $20, so they're not going to break the bank, and you get the whole tube of them, and you can screw them together into whatever length you need. So handy. That's good. We'll have the link for that in our show notes.
Nice.
And this is great looking room. A lot of space around the seating there. It's far away from the speakers. I don't notice much in the way of acoustic treatments, but cosmetically it looks real nice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is a lovely room, and you can tell it's being used purposely just for that. That's so cool. So now his actual questions. His primary streaming source device is an Apple TV 4K. If a movie is available on more than one streaming service provider, is there one service that typically offers better audio quality than the others? That's interesting. I used to worry about that, and I just gave up and said, receiver, process everything. I'm tired of thinking about
convenience, right? Yes, convenience.
Yeah, I just did.
I'm not sure. I mean, Joe, what's your experience been on that one?
As far as, the Apple TV 4K is a very capable device. As far as one streaming service provider, if I'm using the Apple TV, if I have the access to what's, iTunes or Apple's movie service, that's kind of what I tend to go with for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to be very good quality. Two, if I'm going to buy something, I'd rather buy it there because then family members have access to it. We all have iPhones or iPads. So I like kind of keeping that library in one place from a convenience standpoint. We're kind of going to get into some of the other services in the next question.
Yeah. This is one where Jeremy Pyle over at Techthusiasm, he's sort of been tracking this specifically because with the Apple TV 4K and a Mac, he can see some of the bit rates at least, which is, not necessarily one for one what the audio quality actually sounds like. It's a roundabout way of getting some indication of, okay, is this service clearly data compressing more heavily than another? So yeah, it does seem like Apple TV's own service through an Apple TV 4K at least is delivering some of the higher bit rates. Netflix is usually quite good as long as you have the upper tier. You're subscribed to the upper tier, right? If you're subscribed to the basic with ads tier, you're getting a more heavily data compressed stream. But if you're subscribed to the highest tier, Netflix is delivering at least, good bandwidth, if nothing else. Disney Plus, again, highest tier, tends to be pretty okay. The one that sort of stuck out via the Apple TV 4K anyway, and we can't really tell if this is the case across all hardware streamers because we can't really see the bit rates on all of them, but via an Apple TV 4K, Amazon Prime, regardless of what you're paying for, definitely seems to have more data compression as far as the bit rates goes. So that would maybe be the one to avoid with that particular hardware streamer. If you're, same movie is across different streaming services, one of those other three is probably going to have the higher bit rate. Whether that's truly audible is going to be debatable, but as far as just the sheer amount of data coming across, it's probably going to be Apple's own streaming, then Netflix, then Disney Plus.
Yeah, I noticed when it came to the video. Now, I only have a 5.2 system, so I can't speak to Atmos or anything. But yeah, Disney always looked the best to me, followed by Netflix and then Amazon. Probably put HBO above Amazon too.
Yeah, I'm not sure where HBO or Max falls on that scale.
Whatever.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
All right. More questions from David. What about buying movies from one of the streaming providers? Is the audio quality typically better from, say, Apple Movies over Amazon Prime? Who's offering the best audio quality when you buy digital movies to stream via an Apple TV 4K? Would that be any different than not buying?
In my experience, as a bit, I'll get them from Apple if I'm using an Apple TV 4K. I think Joe, you alluded to that as well.
I would buy from Apple whenever I can. I do have a lot of Movies Anywhere accounts that are tied to a lot of other stuff. I would try and redeem on Apple whenever I can, and then if I need to share it over other systems, use Movies Anywhere.
Yeah, there we go. All in agreement.
All right. All right, moving along, he has hardware questions. He's using a 75-inch Sony X900E TV at the moment, but some of the remarkably affordable 98-inch TVs have caught his attention, as it has all of us.
Yeah.
He's leaning towards getting a 98-inch TCL QM851G. Is that the best value out there, or is there a different 98-inch TV he really ought to get instead? He's nervous about this 98-inch purchase.
I've got an opinion. I want to hear what Joe has to say about this one, though.
So one thing, whenever you're looking at the big TVs, be real careful. It's hard to get them places. It's hard to ship those, not getting them damaged. So, I mean, be very careful and inspect things right away as soon as you get those TVs home, out of the box. Make sure that they didn't get damaged in packaging, shipping, moving, whatever it is. I'm going to be, the Sony X900E TV, 75-inch, that's a very nice picture. I would hate to go up in size and down in picture quality, so I'd be careful about that. But I've seen the 98-inch TCLs; they do look great.
Yeah. I mean, my opinion is that's the one I would get. And I mean, okay, I guess side by side, you could probably find some other 98-inch TV that does one specific thing better than the TCL, right? Like, it's probably going to be the case. There's no literally perfect TV or one that does everything better than everything else that's out there. But when I put together how good that TCL QM851G does look, and then the price point that they're offering, that's the one I would go for. If nothing else, I think it's the maximum bang for buck. It is not the least expensive, right? Because the QM751G is also available in a 98-inch size, and it just has fewer local dimming zones, and it doesn't get quite as bright, and it comes in at a lower price point, and it's a tremendous value TV. But I just put the whole package together. Like, that QM851G is like, it's flagship quality as far as LCDs go. So you can find it for around $4,000 quite frequently at that 98-inch size. That's the one I would get. Yeah.
Now, we've answered the question as written, but
yes.
Looking at that room, are we sure we don't want to go projection screen in here? He's got the
looks like a
fiberglass
projection
rods.
room, doesn't
It's
it?
such a white room, man. Look at how white that room is.
But you can cover
you
the
can
windows.
Paint walls. That's easy.
You can.
I'm
with you there.
I'd go
That's
with a
something.
giant flat panel. That's my preference.
I'd go 120, 130 inch screen.
That would be
It's up to you.
doable. That would be doable.
Yeah.
Maybe one day he does both. Motorized screen that comes down in front of the 98-inch flat panel. That's not out of the question.
But at that point, keep the 75 as the behind the screen.
No, 98 and then a screen in front of it.
See, I'd go big, acoustically transparent. I'd use that cubby for my speakers behind the screen.
And not out of the question. Not out of the question.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. That might be the kind of room where I finally go projector. It's big enough for it.
It is.
All right, let me see if I can not lose my place after going back to look at that picture. He says he's heard us say to set your front LCR speakers to large, even when you're using subwoofers, and that's not true. Should he consider setting his surround and Atmos speakers to large as well? First of all, you didn't hear that from us.
That wasn't us. That is a misremembrance over there.
That's
yeah,
not us.
It's not a lie, but it's a mistake. We would not be the people who have ever told you to set any of your speakers to large. Maybe he got us mixed up because Gene has said that sometimes over at Audioholics in his very specific type of setup where he has front, left, to right speakers with gigantic subwoofers built into them, and then he does a whole, the bases being routed to both those as well as multiple other subwoofers and spreading it around and everything. It's a very complicated setup that honestly doesn't apply to very many people outside of Gene Delisella himself, but that's the way he's set it up, so he likes to talk about it. And then there are other people out there, definitely, who have made the recommendation to set your speakers to large, but not AVRant. AVRant is the place that's going to tell you to always set all of your speakers to small, even if you've got big honking towers that can genuinely play pretty darn low in the bass. We're still going to tell you to set them to small and give them a crossover and let your properly positioned pair of subwoofers, because he said he's got 7.2.4, right? So let your subwoofers handle the bass, all your speakers set to small. There you go.
Years ago, before I got those subwoofers,
Yes.
I did run large.
Well, you
on
didn't
my
have much
speakers.
choice because you had zero subwoofers, so you had to set your front speakers to large.
And my front, left, and right speakers have those giant 15-inch woofers, and they gave it a go. They did pretty good.
They're just not ideally physically positioned because you had to put them where they produce a good soundstage and good imaging, not where they produce the best bass response.
And they probably only drop down to maybe 30 hertz or so.
That's right.
And the subwoofers can go lower. Everything got better with the subwoofers. And I remember Tom was like, see, I told you so. Right. And I was like, I never doubted you guys. It's just I didn't feel like I could put the money toward all that. But always get the subwoofers.
Well, and I feel bad for those Sonance top fronts, top rears with 0.2 cubic feet of airspace in that little enclosure. Those things aren't going below 80 hertz. Come on.
Those poor things.
Definitely not.
So I guess we'll move on to his next question. With his full 7.2.4 speaker configuration in place, he went ahead and used the Audyssey Editor app. He noticed the 2 kilohertz dip in the graph of his after frequency response. What's that about?
Yeah. That's a
Is
feature.
that supposed to be there? Is there something he should do to fix that? Uh-oh.
Yeah.
He's got a dip at 2 kilohertz.
That's the infamous Audyssey mid-range compensation dip. What they show you in the graph, I've never been able to replicate that in actual after measurements because it's closer to a notch filter than it is the kind of wideband Q that they're showing in the graph there. That's the target they're going for. That's not an actual after measurement shown in the red part of the graph there. And Tom and I have done this dozens of times at this point and can you actually hear whether the mid-range compensation dip is in there or not? And we're like, I can't hear it. I can't tell. I play a sweep and listen to it with my ears. I'm like, I don't know if that compensation dip is on or off. You could flip it and easily fool me. So the real answer is I don't think it matters too much, but if it just bothers you to see it in the graph, there is a toggle switch in the Audyssey Editor app to turn off the mid-range compensation, and now that after graph will look like a flat, smooth line, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. And I don't mind you doing it because I've never been able to hear the difference, so if it just helps you to visually see it as a flat line instead of the dip, do that, be happy. Have your flat line, turn off the mid-range compensation. That's what it's called. It's a toggle switch. You can turn it off. That's the
and
fix.
It'll never bother you again.
That's right.
And you fixed it. In the Audyssey Editor app's target sound options, you can choose from 2 different high-frequency roll-off targets. Why would he want either of those? And if he should be using a high-frequency roll-off, which one? What's going to be audibly different in either case? Well, you're going to have a more British sound. That's what's going to happen.
So, way back in the day, Chris Kyriakakis, the founder of Audyssey, he talked about this. They kind of set their target curve based on listener response. They had people kind of sitting and tuning in real time until they sort of settled upon a target curve that in general, on average, most people preferred. And it was kind of a preference thing. So that roll-off 1 is the Audyssey reference target curve, which is very, very flat through the entire bass and mid-range. And there's some debate about that. Many people think there should be at least a small gradual rise in the bass. And most research and experience has borne out that advice, that with that editor app, if you put in sort of a little gradual rise, not the enormous 17 decibel sweep that some people put in because they've misinterpreted some of the Harman results that they've seen with the frequency response graphs that they've looked at there. That's a misinterpretation based off of a steady state real-time analyzer response, not a sweep FFT response, which is what we're looking at here. But yes, a general gradual rise of between 3 to 6 dB towards the baseline is what a lot of people have settled on and a lot of research has settled on. So you can draw that yourself in this Audyssey Editor app. But similarly, there's this sort of little gradual tilt down in the treble. So it's from the lowest 20 hertz bass note up to the highest 20 kilohertz treble note. There's a difference of about 6, 7, 8 decibels at most in kind of a pretty gradual sloping line that overall tends to work in most scenarios. And that first high frequency roll off, it's it gets a little steeper above, 14 kilohertz or something like that, where If you're over the age of 50, you're really not hearing much of that at all anyway, but the general downward slope that first roll-off has is closest to what most research has settled on, and way back in the day when they were just doing it by preference and by ear, that's what most people settled on to. So the high roll-off 2 is a steeper roll-off. It doesn't have the little extra dip above 14 kilohertz, but it's just a pretty straight, linear, but steeper roll-off, and that's going to be for highly reflective rooms. It's going to be for highly echoey rooms, which, as Joe pointed out, like, you don't have any room treatments in your room. You might hear a little bit of echoey sound in your space. It's not out of the question that you give that roll-off to a try, and it sounds a little bit more pleasing. But that's what it's for. It's for highly reflective rooms, but tends to be small, highly reflective rooms. You know, you're in a almost like a bathroom setting, a tile setting, and you need to really knock down that high frequency sound. That's what that roll-off 2 is for. So given that you got the bigger room size, I'm betting that roll-off 1 is what's going to end up sounding best, because in general, that's what everybody's preference and experience and measurements have borne out all this time. They kind of got it right.
Like everyone else. Enjoy what everyone else
But that's
enjoys.
my take on it. I don't know, Joe, did you have a different alternate take on that whole thing?
I agree with you. Middle-aged guys, you're not hearing much of 8 kilohertz anyways. I've had my hearing checked. It goes like, it's got its own roll-off.
And there is the option to use the flat setting too, if you just want a completely ruler flat line all the way across. But that doesn't really seem to be where we've landed for the closest thing we have to a general consensus for what makes sense for your target curve now. I mean, the main thing is it just shouldn't have any big swings, any big humps or dips. That it should be quite gradual and smooth in the response overall.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me of the THX re-EQ going from the cinema to the home environments. If you're setting to reference or flat or whatever it is. The other thing is, you don't want to blow up your tweeters, so I wouldn't try and boost them up too much or anything like that. So,
yep. In general, most of the defaults are kind of about right in Audyssey, but I will say adding that little bit of a gradual rise towards the bass with the capabilities of that editor app, quite easy to do, and that's probably the general thing you want to do with that. So, fellas, we've reached 2 hours. I don't know if you want to hang around and do one more question or two more questions or whatever. I'll leave it. What's the vote? I'm happy to keep going.
Do another one or two.
I can keep going.
Okay, well, it sounds like we can, so I guess it's my turn, right? I'll go ahead and read Marc's question. So Marc has a TV and surround sound set up in the family room that's in his basement. All the wiring was done by the previous owner, and he was, the previous owner, that is, using a Sonos home theater. So Marc has a Sonos system as well, and that made it pretty easy to swap out his Sonos equipment for the previous owner's Sonos equipment. And there are power outlets that have been positioned near every speaker location for a 5.1 setup at least. There is a conduit that was run from the TV's location, which is kind of like above a fireplace. It's a low-slung fireplace, so this TV is not way, way up high. This is quite reasonable. But it is a brick wall, or at least a brick wall fascia, surrounding the fireplace and behind the television. And from behind the TV's location on that above the fireplace, a conduit has been run up and over the ceiling to the back wall where the equipment cabinet is located at the back of this space. It's not a very big conduit, though, that he mentioned, not a terribly large diameter, and it does already have an HDMI cable in it, so there isn't exactly much extra space for speaker wire inside of it. So Marc installed his LG OLED on that brick wall portion above the low-slung fireplace, and he put his Sonos Arc soundbar just above the fireplace, just below the TV. And the previous owner left his Sonos Play 3 speakers in their spots high up on the back wall, acting as the surrounds. There are power outlets right behind them, high up on the back wall near the ceiling. So there's also an outlet behind the TV, of course, and then there are more outlets in the built-in shelving units that are on either side of the fireplace and the TV. Marc also has a single Sonos sub. I didn't quite spot it in the photos. He sent in a few photos, but I'm not sure where that Sonos sub is located right now. But he's got one. So it's a 5.1 setup with the front 3 channels all being handled by that Sonos Arc soundbar. So anyway,
is that it in the back? Maybe in the back left, behind the recliner. I see a dark spot back there.
There's a little dark thing. I don't think that's the Sonos sub though. Anyway, we'll take his word that it's there. He considers all of this a passable system. He won't even go as far as good. It's passable. But he'd really like a big audio quality upgrade. He already owns an AV receiver that's in storage at the moment. He'd like to make use of that. He already owns an SVS subwoofer. He'd like to make use of that. It's in storage too. But the problem is wires. He doesn't want to see any wires. Now, he really, for whatever reason, doesn't want to hire a contractor or cut into the drywall at all. And he also doesn't want to snake any wires underneath the wall-to-wall carpet. He's like, I don't want to touch anything, and I don't want to hire anybody to touch anything. And then there's the brick wall at the front that presents some challenges too, of course. So there seems to be plenty of wireless subwoofer kit solutions. So for the SVS sub, he's like, SVS has their own wireless subwoofer kit solution. He knows he could use that. But he... is saying that he could also just position his SVS subwoofer towards the back of the room and run a cable from the equipment rack there where he put the AV receiver to the sub at the back of the room. He's not too worried about the sub. That's the upshot there. Okay. But he's thinking he could probably manage one pair of speaker wires that go from the AV receiver at the back of the room to the pair of surround speakers, which he would still mount on the back wall because there really aren't side walls to speak of. It's quite open and wide on both the left and right sides there. But his question is, what about the front three speakers? He's thinking that a pair of bookshelf front, left, and right speakers can go in the built-in shelves on either sides of the fireplace. But with his coffered ceiling and then open sides to the theater areas and unwillingness to run any wires inside the walls or under the carpet,
No.
He's like, are there any wireless solutions that could work for him for his front three speakers? So he tried researching wireless options that could work with just a regular AV receiver, but he keeps hitting roadblocks when he's trying to do that. So what do we suggest? What could be minimally invasive while providing much better sound quality than his Sonos setup? Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Joe, you've done lots of installations. What would you think would work in here?
You don't want... let's answer the question as it's written before I start giving suggestions.
Okay. So first of all, I think for your center speaker, you can use the conduit that's got the HDMI cable in it. Maybe you have to go all the way down to a 16 gauge or an 18 gauge speaker wire, depending on the diameter of that conduit. But I think that should be doable. I think you should be able to get a speaker wire that goes through the conduit to behind the TV and then just runs down to the center speaker. So that takes care of that, which means we're really only talking about the front, left, and right speakers at that point, right? It's just the front, left, and right speakers that don't have an obvious clear path of running speaker wires. So regardless of what AV receiver you have, I can suggest something that will function. It will function. That is from a brand called Amphony, Amphony. They have their Model 1800 wireless speaker adapter kit. And what's nice here is there's a single transmission unit, as you would expect, and it can take either a line-in signal. This would actually use like a stereo 3.5 millimeter jack, so it'd be a little adapter cable if you have RCA pre-outs on the back of your AV receiver, but that's very simple. It can do it line level, but it can also, the transmitter can take speaker wire. So even if you have an AV receiver with no pre-outs, you can just take the front, left, and right speaker wire binding posts and plug speaker wire into the transmitter. So that's one nice thing about the Amphony system. And then the Model 1800 gives you two separate little wireless receiver / Class D amplifier boxes. So you said you have power outlets where the front, left, and right speakers will go. So you plug in these little Class D amps. One of them gets the left signal. One of them gets the right signal. It provides the Class D amplification right there. So if you can get speaker wires to every other speaker, including the center, which seems totally doable with that conduit, the Amphony Model 1800 goes for $200. So it's not crazy priced. That could give you a solution for your front, left, and right speakers that's wireless. You do need to plug them into power, but you said they had the power outlets. The other option is, Lee and I talked about this a while ago. There's this Facetto Audio Q or Audio CU or Audio Copper, however they're choosing to pronounce the CU there. I've just been saying Audio Q. But this sends the audio signal over your power lines. The thing is with this, it's completely replacing the AV receiver. You do not use this in conjunction with an AV receiver. The transmitter of the Facetto Audio Q system replaces the AV receiver, and then it sends the audio signals through your existing household power lines. So you have a single receiver box for each and every speaker and subwoofer. So 5.1 setup, you'd have 6 of the receiver boxes and the signal transmitter. It can go up to a 9-speaker system. It can do Atmos up to a 5.1.4 configuration. But it would be $800 to get the 5.1 setup and be relying on your household wiring, and you need a separate box and a power connection for every single speaker and subwoofer with that. So those are the options I could come up with, but Joe has a probably better suggestion.
Oh yeah.
Well, so first off, you just have that one speaker that's underneath the TV, right? But you mentioned you have power in the cabinets. So could you get, a better left and right Sonos speaker to service left and rights, so you can get, a better front stage?
Do that though, because the
see, and Sonos is such a closed architecture that it's kind of tricky.
And they really rely on the sound bars being your front three speakers for a surround sound.
Right, but could you use that as just a center and get different left and rights? I'm not sure about that.
I have never seen Sonos configured that way.
I don't think so.
I don't know either.
I don't think you can do that.
You also then add a subwoofer? Can you add that SVS in addition to?
Nope, not to the Sonos system. You can have two Sonos subs, but there's no way to connect a different brand of subwoofer to a Sonos system. It's a Sonos sub or nothing, or two.
But he said he has a receiver.
Which he's not using. It's in storage right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean. Yeah, I don't love any of this. So first thing, if you really don't want to run any wires, there's some companies out there that do, and I forget the anagram for it, the lettering, but it's the Wi-Fi enabled speakers,
yeah, the
right?
WISA,
so that you could,
WISA.
WISA, thank you.
WISA, yeah.
So you could do something like that, get a piece of equipment that will wirelessly transmit to all of your locations and put better speakers everywhere.
But that's doing a kind of similar thing to the audio cue in the sense that it replaces the AV receiver entirely. There's a WISA transmission box that takes the place of the AV receiver, and now all the speakers must be wireless. They must be WISA.
Right, but you could then get a WISA center channel, left and rights, rears, and add a sub. So just a thought. Realistically, I'm using that conduit that you have in that ceiling to pull new wire.
Yep.
It's, I know you don't want to.
I mean, how skinny can that conduit possibly be?
Yeah,
it could be half an inch.
You can use like a blue Smurf tube or something. But if you've got an HDMI cable on that, those things have pretty good tensile strength. I'd be pulling something new with it, right? Get a big orange Smurf tube, fill that full of HDMI and 3 or 4 speaker wires, pull that from the front, put your receiver in the back, get a second sub. Run dual subs. Yeah, I'd be looking at gutting this thing and doing it the right way.
Yeah, like very often when people say, I don't want to see any speaker wires, but I don't want to put anything inside the walls, that's when I'll mention Sewell's Ghost Wire, because that's super duper flat, self-adhesive wire that you can mud and paint right over on the walls, and it becomes completely invisible. But in this room, I'm like, where would I run the ghost wire? Because you got a coffered ceiling. The left and right walls are way far away, and I'm like, I don't think ghost wire is actually the solution in this particular setup. So I don't know. I'd
be looking at doing like a 5.2.4 system in here.
Sure.
If you're going to cut holes for those 4-in ceiling speakers, oh look, you've got access for wires.
All of a sudden, there's access to the ceiling. Yeah, that's the that could be the justification there. Yeah,
push it over. Yeah.
But as written, to go exactly with the restrictions that he mentioned, I think that Amphony Model 1800 is maybe going to be your best bet here, because it sounds like there is a way to get wires to every other speaker. It's just the front, left, and right that are the real challenge here. And an Amphony Model 1800 could take care of that for you. So I think we can get to a solution for him with that. Yeah.
I want to see how this one works out. Is the next one Joe's question?
Yep. And our last question.
It's our last one for this week. So if you're willing to, why not? We'll make this a 2.5-hour podcast. What the heck?
Yeah, the 2.5-hour club.
Final question for the evening comes from Brandon. Last week, Brandon was hoping to score a Black Friday deal on a 65-inch OLED TV. It seems to be the theme for the night. OLEDs.
See?
We said to either get an LG C3 from Costco or a Samsung S90C from Best Buy. Well, he hasn't pounced just yet. We pointed out how the Samsung S90C QD-OLED has some picture quality advantages over the LG C3W OLED. And of course, being Samsung, there's no Dolby Vision. So without Dolby Vision on board, does the Samsung do some type of frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping the way the LG can for HDR10 content? Rob?
Yes, Samsung does have that. Sony has that on their OLEDs as well, both Sony's QD-OLEDs and their WOLEDs. So yeah, all of them are doing a type of frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. Samsung, in general, leans towards slightly over-brightening everything when you activate their version of dynamic tone mapping. They err on the side of people expect HDR to be bright. Let's make it a little bit bright for them. So like I say, I mean, there's no true right and wrong when it comes to dynamic tone mapping. It's a choice on the part of the manufacturers. So where LG tends to go for quite a balanced approach, where they try to retain quite a lot of highlight detail, but let a little bit of the very top of it roll off a bit, and then try to keep the standard dynamic range portion of the image quite accurate, although there's a little bit of extra brightening in the deep shadows that Vincent Teo utterly hates and will never let you turn on the dynamic tone mapping that LG recommends. But I'm like, if you don't have a pitch black room, I actually find it quite nice to be able to see what's going on in the shadows. But Samsung in general over brightens the entire image a little bit. That's the choice they've made, because they're like, hey, most people are watching in a lit room and they prefer that just everything looks brighter. Goes into HDR, they expect it to be brighter. Let's make it brighter for them. So that's sort of a different choice that they've made in their dynamic tone mapping.
And Lee, just to editorialize, what's your universally good advice?
Universally good advice
on buying a TV?
Buy the LG OLED 65-inch, unless you have a reason not to.
Well,
unless you want a bigger
that
one,
Samsung
buy a bigger
S90,
one.
That Samsung S90C is really, really nice, and at $1,000
Yeah.
right now, that is a heck of a deal on the 65-inch quantum dot S90C OLED. Yeah,
that's true.
Really
but I'm just saying, where I start everyone, they go, hey, what TV should I get? You should get a 65-inch OLED from LG. Now, let's talk about your room and what you're going to watch and what everything else.
Yeah.
And to see if there's a reason you should not get a 65-inch OLED from LG. There might be a reason. Maybe you need a bigger TV. Maybe you need to spend less. I don't know. Or maybe you have a special. Maybe you want a projector. Maybe it's time for a projector. So but that's where I start, man. So I would just grab that LG, whichever one of those is cheaper. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, because the Costco deal. If he's not a Costco member, it's not the less expensive than the Samsung. So that's the question there.
There's about to be some crazy deals, though.
There's going to be more
real
deals.
Yeah.
No question.
So just keep an eye out. And there's going to be a lot of people pouncing on OLEDs in the next few weeks, for sure.
So then to continue on, we talked about the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. His question goes, if so, will that mitigate the lack of Dolby Vision entirely? And are there any other downsides to the Samsung at all?
So, I mean, yeah, I'm at this point not that worried about Dolby Vision. The vast majority of HDR content really isn't doing a ton above 1,000 nits, and that Samsung S90C can produce 1,000 nits accurately. So even if you don't use the dynamic tone mapping, even if you just have bog standard HDR10 static metadata single tone map applied at the beginning of the content material, it can show it nit for nit. Like what the signal called for, that's what you get. You get the accuracy out of it. Now, for the stuff that's been mastered to 2,000 or 4,000 or games that go all the way up to 10,000 nits, yeah, there's going to be some tone mapping applied. I'm like, the difference between Dolby Vision versus like just generally good HDR tone mapping, like it's not that much of a concern to me. I'm not that worried about Dolby Vision at this point. Dolby Vision's biggest benefit is for displays that can't do 1,000 nits. That's the biggest benefit of it. Once you've got a display that can hit 1,000 nits and then tone map perfectly fine above that, I'm not that worried about Dolby Vision. So, not really any other sides to the Samsung. It's a really nice TV. That S90C was a really nice quantum dot OLED TV. So, yeah, whatever one is cheaper and more easily available to you. I wouldn't,
much.
Like if I got a Samsung S90C OLED, I'd be happy as could be. If I got a LG C3 OLED, I'd be happy as can be. And if one of them is $200 cheaper than the other one, that's the one I'm getting on Black Friday.
That's the one. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that is it. Look at that. I will mention Saucy and Tyler did send in questions on a Monday, so I didn't add those to the list for this week because we had oodles and oodles to get through, as evidenced by the fact that we did more than 2 hour podcasts. Well, Tom's and mine was right around exactly 2 hours, and then this one's 2 hours and 20 minutes here. We covered a lot this week. I don't know if anybody out there is
4 hours in 1 week
the
for all the listeners.
hour
Look at
club
that.
if you're dedicated like that.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad we did this, Joe and Lee. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here this entire time while Tom has been away. I can't thank you enough, and the listeners can't thank you enough. So thank you.
No,
guys.
thank you. My pleasure. Glad to be involved.
Oh, you know I love being here and doing this, so it's fine. I'm just excited for Tom. I hope that through all this turmoil, at least being back on the show more regularly will give him some focus and peace of mind and a touch of normalcy. He's got so much he's still got to deal with, but it's going to feel good for him.
It was kind of funny while I was recording with him this morning. It's like, you know, I know him well enough that I could just kind of read some of his expressions, and it's like at moments, you know, I could kind of see his mind kind of wandering away a little bit because of all the things he's still dealing with. And he was also describing how now where he's recording, he doesn't have any curtains on his window yet, so he can see what's outside his window on behind his computer screen. So it's just kind of like, oh, what's going on out there? There's a little bit of that, so.
It's pretty outside.
So it's going to be a gradual easing Tom back into things. That's the plan. But
that's good though. It's good for him. It's good for him.
I'm a little bit sad. This little era of having our guest co-host here is coming to a close for now. But this obviously won't be the last time that we ever see Lee and Joe around here on AVRant. We'll be back at some point for sure. But yeah, from
maybe
here on
we
out,
can find little special topics that me and Joe can come on and discuss with you for these extra bonus episodes, so people can get their 4.5 hours of
depending
AVRant.
on how all the questions go. I'm not going to be forcing Tom to go way past the 2-hour mark at this point in time. So whenever things build up for a little bit, we might create another bonus episode here or there. And sure. It's great to know we got people we can count on. And speaking of people we can count on, I want to thank again our listeners of the week, folks who have been supporting this podcast the entire time. That support has been tremendous. And for anyone who wants to continue donating directly to Tom and his family, just come to our website, avrant.com, go over to the right-hand side, and there you'll see a sign that says Support AVRant, picture of a cup of coffee there, and that takes you over to PayPal. Any one-time donations, all that money's going straight to Tom and his family, and the little cut that PayPal takes for themselves, I guess that's going to PayPal, of course, but otherwise that's the most direct way that you can support Tom and his family right now. So folks have been doing that. It's tremendous. Can't thank everybody enough for that. If you want to financially support the podcast itself, all the expenses it takes to keep the podcast going, you can join the automatic monthly donations over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. We've divided things that way, keeps it nice and easy and organized in our minds. So patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Those funds are going to fund the podcast itself. We got 132 patrons have been holding strong over there. So if you'd like to join those ranks, that's the place to come and do that. So big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you do want your questions answered in the style that we're doing them, first in, first out, everything answered on this podcast that comes into us, no deciding which questions make the show or not, because happily, we're not completely overloaded at this point. One day that might happen, who knows, but for now, we're like, let's just try and answer all the questions. Let's see if we can do it instead of leaving people hanging. So if you want your question answered, just email it to us. The email address is question@avrant.com. Should be pretty easy to remember. What do I have? I have a question. Where do I send it? avrant.com. That's the way to do it. Question@avrant.com. So, I will say after all of that, on behalf of Tom Andrew, this has been AVRant. My name is Rob H.
I'm Joe Klusnick.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.